part 2 of crop production. We're going to go into a review of what we discussed last time. So this is going to be a really quick one. Again, starting off with crop planning, some of the key things you want to know. This is my current 2025 farm produce availability. So this is my harvest schedule. This is not my planting schedule. This is just what I give to my chefs so that they have kind of a rough frame of like what they can be expecting at any given time. Again, not planting or growing schedule. This is about like what produce is going to be available to them at this time. So this is something you want to know. Honestly, I mean, I feel like I'm speaking to sort of a group of maybe growers for the most part. Obviously, you're going to be able to find a lot of different calendars online, especially for this growing zone and for just North Texas specifically. I mean, nurseries have them. Any seed company really has them. So I like to say this isn't about getting something perfect, because over time, season after season, you're going to like hone in on what you like growing, what grows well where you're at. But I always like to have one of these available before I even get started. Then obviously you want to get into spacing. So this is more for a raised bed situation, but I really love these graphics. It's from my company, or not my company, the company I work for, Green City Growers, for those of you who don't know. I am an employee of theirs. I farm out of Westlake, Texas. And they have these really cool graphics that talk about spacing. So this is some information you're going to want to have on hand. The crops that you want to grow, you want to know like how far apart they need to be from each other, how far apart they need to be from maybe something else that's a little bit different from them. I really love this because it tells you square footage of what the plant needs, and not just like in-row spacing. It kind of just gives you like or for me, a little bit of spatial awareness of what everything needs. Feel free to take a photo. Although I do think, well, it's not here. I have made the slides available to her to pass on to the class, so also don't feel like I need to capture it all right now. Here is an example of a raised bed. I like to include this because sometimes I have gardeners in classes or people who are just here for backyard growing. This is what I would say about as complex as a backyard garden crop plan should look. You can have it broken down season-wise. Spring and fall can be pretty similar. Summer, then I would have a winter. My company is Boston-based, so they don't do winter. I'm the only winter grower for them. But just having like spring, summer, fall, winter, what is this going to look like for a raised bed is always really great just to map it out. And these are some really fun, honestly, combos that look really attractive actually when they're fully grown. But this is my spacing, so just generally speaking. These are all the different types of crops. I don't grow every single one of these. I don't do microgreens, never will. Very rarely do arugula. I don't think it's worth growing cut greens personally. For my situation, it is worth it if you get a good price for it. Anyway, but this is generally what I have. This is something that I think all growers should have, is just knowing your inner row spacing and then how many rows in a bed, if you're working on a permanent bed system, or if you're doing row to row, just knowing like, hey, how far apart are those rows going to be is a really good thing. And then we're going to go next to, this is a Johnny's seed for citrate tomatoes. This is on Johnny's Seed online, which has a lot of great information. If you source your seed from Johnny's, which most growers source a lot of their seed from Johnny's, you're going to find there's really good information there that can help inform your crop plan. I circled some of the ones that you're going to want to know for your crop plan. Obviously, days to maturity. Under here, if you like, this is the first page. If you like typed in citrate tomatoes, this is exactly what you see. But if you scroll down, you'll see growing information, and it's going to give you like a little bit, honestly several paragraphs, sometimes only one or two. But for tomatoes, they tend to be pretty wordy. And it'll tell you, for instance, like days to transplant. So if you're like seeding something, how long it can take. Obviously, this is your germination guide, so follow this. If you're, for instance, in my situation, I do not have a very great greenhouse. So it took my tomatoes actually a really long time to germinate this year because I seeded them right before that nasty 12-degree freeze. So just knowing like, okay, what's going to be the optimum temperature for my seeds to germinate is really going to determine like, hey, is this going to take a few days or is this going to take 2 weeks? And that, again, informs your days to transplanting. It'll tell you like, hey, what's the soil temperature that you're gonna be shooting for. If for planting, it's gonna tell you a lot of great information. So I always tell people, like, even if you're not maybe using Johnny's, most seed companies have a lot of this information, so you can just glean off of that. I'm a big fan of spreadsheets. I like to put all my information in spreadsheets. I probably put too much information in spreadsheets, but it is just a really great resource to have on hand before you start your crop plan. And then another thing you're gonna have to know, because this is not reflected in any of my crop plans, because I've been doing this now for 10 years, and I don't know, but it's just in my head. But you're gonna wanna know how much yield you're gonna get for the crop you're growing. So, especially if you're doing like a CSA or a farmer's market and you're trying to meet a certain number of units or a certain amount of like a dollar value, you're gonna wanna know like how many tomatoes is gonna help me supply tomatoes for a 50 family CSA, or to make like $1,000 at farmer's market in June or something. So you're gonna wanna know this. This is off of, again, Johnny's, which I think is really great. It is not, I've never had to use it, so I can't speak to the accuracy of it. There are charts out there that I would say, again, it's all about you getting to know your land, and it might take a couple of seasons to figure that out. But record keeping is gonna be your best friend. But if you're in your first year or you're just trying to figure it out, this can be a really great starting point. I think the worst thing is getting paralyzed by like, oh, I don't know if this is exactly gonna be perfect. Perfection is not the goal, especially the first year. It's just about getting some baseline going so that you can kind of have comparison, take records, and again, just keep tweaking it year after year. But Johnny's has a really great grower's library, a lot of good resources to start with, and this is in the planning tools and calculators. These are our formulas. These will make more sense. I think all of y'all were basically here. So we already went through kind of the formulas. If you don't already know them, again, these slides will be available for you. But now we will go into some instructions. Any questions so far from our review? By chance? Again, as always, oh, this is recorded. Sorry. City growers, I'm in the Dropbox. You don't see it. Let's see, how can I? Okay. This is, maybe if I do this. Can y'all still kind of see? Make out what? Okay, so this is what we worked on last time, if y'all remember. I did an example of some tomatoes, sweet peppers, a few solanaceous crops, and then some successions of cucurbits. I get really bad squash bugs and cucumber beetles, so bad. So I actually do 6 successions of cucurbits in a season. That's because I start them in March, and I usually go until like literally the freeze, usually like November. And so I do 6 successions because I like to provide a continuous supply of them to the kitchen. You do not need to do this. I'm definitely trying to get this down to more like 4, maybe 3. Maybe 1, not 1, a little more than 1. So that's what's reflected there. And then, so we took a look at this map. We said like, cool, great map. Good job, Lisa, you did great. And then we went into our master sheet. And so this is what the formulas that we just looked at are gonna apply. The formulas are in every single gray column. That's where the formulas are applied in. So if I click there, you can see there's the one formula. There's the one that's got all the parentheses in it. But this is really just like bare bones, like something, again, it's just to help you have a plan so when you're in the middle of the season, you know like, okay, there's a million fires burning, everything's going, you know, to hell in a handbasket. All you gotta do is look at your plan and be like, okay, I know this week I need to seed this in the greenhouse and I should be planting this in the field. I cannot tell you how many times that saved me in my first couple of years of being a farm manager, where I was just like, well, I don't know what is happening. You lose that big picture in the middle of the season. So this is really just so you can have a basic plan, so you know every single week exactly what you're planting and what you're seeing in the greenhouse. So again, I don't know if y'all need me to go through the formulas. We're not going to do very much work in this, but but I will be providing, I said I would be providing the slides and like this template, so that can be shared to the class and y'all can look at it on your own time. This is a seed worksheet. If you are cash strapped, I highly recommend a seed worksheet. Mostly because you'd be surprised how expensive seeds are, especially really good seeds. Good cucumber, tomato, sweet pepper seeds. You're like, oh cool, $4 for 20. You're gonna need like, if you need anywhere close to like a couple hundred, that really adds up. So I've used seed worksheets since the very beginning because I've mostly worked on under-resourced farms where you're like, cool, the CSA checks, I'm waiting for those CSA checks to come in before I can even buy things, you know? Or like, oh, I cannot afford a garden hose this year. Crazy, right? So that's where my seed worksheets came in. They also helped me, honestly, source with sourcing. This is what I source now in Texas. It was a little bit different when I lived in Massachusetts and farmed up there. Big fan of Fedco, great company to source from, but don't necessarily recommend them down here. But one thing I do want to point out is I do incorporate a safety factor. You'll notice it was in my crop plan. It was kind of baked into one of the formulas. I always have generally 2 safety factors, one for when I order seeds and then one for when I'm seeding in the greenhouse. That safety factor can change. It's really just to account for not every seed's going to germinate, and you just want to have a little bit extra, essentially. Yeah, any questions so far? And then this is just always have records, even if it's just this map, and you just type in what you planted when. Honestly, that's pretty decent, but this is my I don't know, my focus on record keeping is going to be your best friend if you want to do this year after year. And it can be something as small as literally this, just mapping out what you actually did, but it truly will be your best friend if you can record as much as you can. Spend that 10 extra minutes each week just writing down, like, you can see pests you noticed, again, things you've seeded, things you've planted, just how things are doing generally at whatever time or week of the year is really great. We're obviously going to talk about record keeping when it comes to spraying, because that is super important, especially if you're like, I don't know, trying to get certified organic is definitely important, but it's just great to have on hand. I don't think any of us are going to get audited, but if you do, you need those records. Okay, any questions so far? This was like the review portion. This is what we went through last time, whether you remember it or not. It was 2 weeks ago. I barely remember it. Yes?
So what would be an example of the entry in that chart, the map?
This?
The map, the last
This map, yeah. So this could just be, I like to color code things. So let's say my projection rate was that I would get some cherry tomatoes in the ground on March 10th. So let's say I was like, oops, that didn't. Then I would just put cherry tomatoes here in bed 1. I have 2 different rows. I have row 1 and 2, you don't need 1 and 2. And then I would color code it. I like to color code it yellow. Oops, not that yellow, it's bright yellow. And I say, okay, this is the planting. And then I come in here, and each week I will fill it with green until I'm ready to harvest, which is actually generally more like the end of May. At the earliest for cherries, for me. This is like earliest it would ever be. Didn't fill it. Okay. Oh, wrong. Hello. So every single week I would come in and I would just take this and I'd say, okay, it's still growing. I haven't harvested yet. And I just color in the next block every single week until I come to like whatever week I start harvesting, and then I go, okay, I've been harvesting now all these weeks, and then maybe I'm like, yeah, it's getting hot, flowers are dropping, maybe I don't harvest in August, but hey, I put down some 5, 10, 10, There's got some flowers. It probably wouldn't be actually, it'd be more like this. And then I'm gonna start harvesting again. Usually the white means like either it's empty. Sometimes I use black to signify like this is kind of a dead zone. That happens sometimes with my solanaceous crops, like my peppers and tomatoes specifically. But that's essentially it. That's about as easy as it gets. And then what you have is then a map that you can refer to for your next year's crop plan that says like, oh, this is kind of exactly what happened. This is what I can rely on, etc. And then obviously, like you can add, I mean, you can do whatever you want. You could use this to even keep your harvest numbers. I have a separate Excel sheet, but you can be like, oh, this day I harvested 55 pounds. Oh, it doesn't want to because I choose that color. So you can even include your harvest numbers in here. I think that's a really great thing to keep track of if you're gonna keep track of, actually, I've already said this. I just said if you're gonna keep track of anything, keep track of this. But if you're gonna keep track of anything, keep track of this and your harvest numbers always. That is a given across the board. But you can always include them into the map if you want. I generally have a separate Excel sheet. It's easier for me. But you really can do anything you want. The Excel sheet, the spreadsheets are your oyster. Any other questions?
You said there's something about dead zones. It's like something you don't do anything that day.
Yeah, it's just a week where maybe I don't have a harvest, or maybe I pulled the bed. Usually I have, I use white usually for if the bed is empty, like there's nothing in it. And I usually use black if it's like, there's something in it, but it's just like I'm not harvesting. It's like in the middle of this kind of like harvest window. So if I didn't harvest from it that week, it's usually like, there's a black box. And then
like,
if it's empty, it's like, it's
Laffy, if certain crops slow down, you know, during the winter, I mean, summertime in the dead of the heat, you know, so that could be like a dead zone. Like there's, the plants are still there, they're just not producing anything.
Like the tomatoes, you know, like above 100 degrees, I think pollen's inactive. And they give fruit.
Yeah.
But in the fall, if you keep your tomatoes alive, you'll get a second crop. So.
Yeah, it's mostly for, honestly, just my solanaceous, and not even eggplant just pops off, but it's really tomatoes and sweet peppers that sometimes there's some weeks where I'm like, nothing's happening, and it's usually in August. Again, it can be color-coded any way you want. It's really just, the record keeping should be as accurate as you can, you know, as accurate as you can be, because that is what's gonna be the most helpful for you. Because then the next year, maybe you're like, oh, I had a huge dead zone of like no tomatoes in August. I was expecting tomatoes because I have a CSA. Maybe you're like, okay, maybe I'll grow extra eggplant or extra okra since it's making the comeback, or something else. Maybe throw some. I do bok choy and arugula in August, to be honest, under shade cloth. So maybe you're like, oh, I'll just grow some lettuce, bok choy, beets, to make up for that lack of, you know, tomatoes and sweet peppers.
Are beets hard to grow?
I haven't had issues with them, especially when I transplant them. But yeah, I haven't had issues with them, but some people do, and it is it can be a common problem. I feel like, yeah, I don't know. Does anyone have issues, has had issues with beets and has conquered them?
No,
I cannot
not
speak
yet.
to that.
We haven't conquered them yet, but we have issues on beets on the farm.
Yeah.
It seems like every time we plant them, we get like a little piddly harvest, or you know,
Yeah.
they never really get that big. You know, they're like little bitty guys.
Even when we
Yeah.
can, to be direct, so maybe we should try transplanting.
Transplanting is the only way I have the patience for getting big beets, because if I have to thin something, it means I failed. I'm tilling the whole thing in. I will say Hyatt has a different experience.
We had a conversation about it. I've never had issues growing beets, grid, golden, whatever, and we always direct seed it, but we cluster plant them to where they are thinned out, so we sell different kinds, so, you know, we'll put like 5 to 7 seeds, you know, with our seeder, you know, it drops that many seeds, and you thin them out, but you're not thinning them out to just compost. The ones on the outside, that are smaller than the ones that can be in the middle, people want baby beets, you know, so you can sell them as baby beets, and as you pull those, harvest those, the ones in the center are gonna get bigger. I've never transplanted them.
Leaf greens are good too.
The ones I've always had success with are the bull's blood red beets. And those do really well for us, so.
I really like chogyas. They're not as, some people say they're not as sweet as like the red ace or bull's blood or boro. But they grow faster.
Red Ace too.
Yeah, chogyas grow really fast, and they've been the most forgiving beet for me. I don't know if anyone grows chogyas. They're the like striped ones, the candy cane striped. You've probably seen them.
I've always wanted to grow them because they look pretty.
They look pretty and they grow faster, and they're, in my opinion, they've been the most forgiving beet for me. So, when you're trying to grow a lot of things, you gotta find the forgiving varieties. But great questions. Any other questions before we kind of get into?
I have another question. So
More numbers.
When you're working with areas that are kind of like desert resources where people are not so accustomed to this kind of food, right? Do you do education about how to cook? Because I don't know one person that would know what to do with the beet. You know what I mean? Because it's hard, you gotta cut it.
Yeah.
And so my question is that part of the education of the community? Because you're introducing these beautiful foods, because the more colorful they are, the more nutritious they are, and a lot of people don't know what to do. I remember I made like a squash, and my friend said, I don't know what to do with that. I wouldn't know, not a real soft one, that spaghetti squash.
Yeah.
They're so delicious.
I think
don't know what
there's
to do with them.
Yeah, I think there's a balance, right? Like you don't want to, it'll burn you out pretty quick if you're like, I'm gonna grow all these varieties, I found all these cool things I grow in the Middle East and I think it'll grow well here. That's great, but you have to definitely grow for your market. So I always encourage growers to like simplify a little bit first, like establish that foothold. And there is some education on the part of the farmer. Like if you have a CSA, it's very easy, or I would always incorporate a recipe.
Okay.
You just Google a recipe,
Okay.
or you have your own. But there's also, well, sorry. Well, I was gonna say, but I don't personally think it's on the job. Farmers wear too many hats, so I would say I would rely more on like organizations and nonprofits that, I do know there's a lot of them that do, or I see those cooking classes or like education around how to use produce.
That is a thing, there is, the disconnect with, people wanting to source local food, but also not knowing how to do with it. There's different ways you can approach that. I agree that that's the last thing the farmer needs to be worrying about. But because that's the last thing the farmer needs to be worried about, if they're going into a certain market, I feel it's important to grow culturally relevant.
Yes,
Because you're just creating more work for yourself. You're probably going to be doing a lot of waste, having a lot of waste from it. So it's also about market research, before you start growing. Because we hear people all the time like, oh, I tried all that stuff, but I don't have anywhere to sell it, So it's like we're the cart before the horse. But there's other organizations that do education that you can collaborate with. One of the things that I did, we are a nonprofit, so we had more people, involved. And we sold to restaurants. I would get recipes from chefs. But I did that because Dallas has the highest number of restaurants per capita in the country, and people were willing to go out and eat than make their own food. So we were selling super specialty crops that, because I came from the restaurant industry, and so it was like, if these people start seeing the food that's on their plate at that restaurant than at the market, and they have a recipe card from the chef, But it all goes to, it depends on who your market is, so.
And
Just have to
in
be
Dallas, let's be real, it's probably like a little bit, the farmers markets are probably centered around, I would say Anglo culture and like what they eat, but we have a lot of diversity in Dallas, so there's probably a lot of untapped potential of like being able to grow for different cultures here. It just hasn't been traditionally done, at least in the last 20, 30 years here. I would say
It was
maybe.
kind of like at that meeting we were at, with the city and Sister Equate from Pan African, like, she was like, in the Black community, we like to see white eggplants, you know,
Yeah.
not purple ones. And you can go to a farmer's market, you never see white eggplants, you know, like never.
Maybe the speckled purple ones, those fairy tales,
Yeah.
maybe.
So yeah, it just depends on, you know, your plan for your
Yeah.
farming operation, who you're trying to reach, what you're trying to do with your food, and how fast you're trying to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Storage too.
It is,
Yeah, storage, cold
Yeah.
storage is a big deal.
yes. I worked for a farmer who, in his first years, they would use the culvert, like the rain culvert, to put their produce in until CSA could come. That was their cold storage. And one time it rained and they all washed away.
No.
Anyway, I'm sorry I outed him on camera. Okay, so the last CSA Farmers Market farm I worked for was 2020. So I just pulled up this as an example because it is a very different, this is typically how I crop plan now. I think I have an example of one of mine from, this is how I crop plan now, and that's because I work in a situation where you see there's not a lot of white space. That means there's not a lot of empty beds. I work in a situation where they just take whatever I grow, and it's already essentially pre-bought is what it is essentially. And so unless you have that type of situation, you're probably going to be growing for a particular amount of, I mean, sometimes it's units, and there's going to be usually a dollar value associated with what you're trying to grow, and it's a balance of like how much you can afford based on like the crew you have, the equipment you have, what you can buy, you know. So the scalability of it is it can vary, but it's a much different approach. So for instance, I like to pull this up because if you are considering, unless you're like literally lucky like me, which I know I'm very privileged and fortunate to be in this situation, you're probably likely going to be going at it from, honestly, like a top down. So this is my basic crop plan from this year, 2020, when I did 2 farmers markets and a CSA. So I took my farmers market sales from 2019 and I put them all in this nice spreadsheet. I got all this information from Square, you know, like I highly recommend having a Square space if you are going to do market, because keeping all of this record keeping is really tough. So this is just really pulled from there. I have the price. I have the price in the unit, so the price per unit, and then each one of these numbers represents units sold. So that's all it is. And then just with a little bit of math, you get formulas where you just add the total number of units, where you just say equals. Remember we talked about spreadsheets, you start off with the equal sign, and then you can type in sum for like, hey, I want to add all of this. I won't get into spreadsheet 101 today, but if you're curious, I can. But there's a lot of great tools online for it. But essentially this is the total units, and then this is the total amount sold, and then at the very bottom, this is how much I made at Farmers Market in 2019. So I can go, okay, that was good, but that's not like I want to bump it, obviously, like capitalism, y'all, like bump that number up. I wanna, if there's inflation, like I wanna hire somebody. So this number is just like the baseline for, okay, what I want to project. So this is one of my farmers markets. As you can tell, my numbers are nice, whole numbers, like very clean, because this is all my projections. This is what I'm hoping to supply to this farmers market for this 2020 year. This is my second one, and then this is my total. So I took the sum of the sum of the total units in these 2 spreadsheets, and I put it in here. And so this is the total amount I'm hoping to make just at farmers markets that 2020 year. And then I should have a equals here. I'm not gonna do it here. But I would also have a total number of units. So like how many units I'm gonna, oh no, sorry, I take that back. And this also tells me the total number of units I need to grow. So again, for lettuce, that's easy, right? That just means really I need to grow 1,075 heads of lettuce. Done. Kale's a little bit different. That means 168 bunches. So that's where, if you can connect the line of like how the information you need to know to have a crop plan. You need to know how many kale plants are gonna give you 168 bunches. Again, that Johnny's calculator can give you a good baseline, but this is a number you're gonna have to learn over the years, and that's where record keeping comes in. So if you know how many kale plants you planted, you know how many bunches they got you the year before, it's gonna really help inform you for the next coming year. So that first year, just get that baseline, but this is where I hope you guys can see the connection of where record keeping comes into play to help you make hopefully a little bit more money the following year.
On that note, I know I mentioned last time as far as record keeping going in, like being able to qualify for USDA programming. I think the biggest thing is, for this record keeping within those USDA programs is being able to have that crop insurance. And if you have crop losses and those kinds of things, they're gonna ask for your records, so you can get reimbursed, for whatever losses you have. So, if you wanna get involved with the USDA.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
It's not for everybody,
it's
you know, but some people, it works for some.
my boss, the president of Green City Growers, he grows on an acre, but he just does like, I don't wanna say just, like potatoes, onions, really like very simplified. And he is just on like, I think it's barely an acre, and he qualified for crop losses. So it really, no matter how small you are, this is not a big, large commercial kind of thing.
Small scale growers have only recently been able to have this opportunity,
So take advantage of it, show them that it's needed, because like if not enough people do it, I won't say it's gonna be scrapped, but these days you're like, what's gonna be scrapped? Anyway, it's not a politics, it's a discussion, too easy. Okay, any questions so far on how we got to totals, farmers market sales projections, notes, questions on record keeping? We're gonna move on to CSA projections. So the year before I had only done farmers markets. This farm was just picking up vegetables again, and so we were like, let's go into the slow, let's just do market, because CSA, as anyone who's run a CSA farm knows, I prefer CSAs now, but there is so much anxiety, because you're like, these people have given me money, and now I must give them something. And there's so much anxiety, especially in the first month. You're like, is anything gonna make it? So this was, I didn't have any numbers from the previous year, and I think I pulled a lot of these actually, they had done a CSA years and years before this. So I kind of pulled some of those numbers from there, but it's not reflected in this specific spreadsheet. But again, this looks just the same as the farmer's market, it's just missing the price. And that's just because your CSA is usually like a fixed cost thing, like you're like, hey, I'm charging you $500 for 12 weeks. So these are just units. Again, all the units are the same as in the farmer's market. Have as much uniformity as you can. These are all represent I don't have total value, but I do have total units. So if you remember, we have total units for farmer's market. Now we have total units for CSAs. And now we have just a total units that I need to grow overall. So this, for 2020, for my CSA and my farmer's market, I need to grow 3,075 heads of lettuce. I need to have 668 bunches of kale, so on and so forth. So does that make sense? And this is again a formula where you can go across spreadsheets, where you can say equal, sum, and you can go to this spreadsheet and say this one, and then comma that one, and then it pops up there. That was the most blase way to explain spreadsheets, math. But does anyone have questions?
So the horizontal, the columns of dates,
Yes.
are the planting of each plant, how many seeds or how many bunches?
Not yet. This is just harvest. This is on
Okay, those are the harvest numbers.
Yes, so
On
on
a particular date. Each date is not it's not a consecutive date. It seems like you skipped a date, from the J to K. That's how many days? I think I'm just looking at the particular.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, they are
JDK.
you have to.
Okay, D to E.
This represents every single week from May 4th to my growing season was May to November. So this is every single week between beginning of May to beginning of November. And then each column, so like and I'm sorry if hopefully this is what you're asking. Each column, so like this is August 31st. This represents on this week of August 31st, I'm harvesting 145 lettuce, 6 bunches of kale, 14 bunches of chard, 210, I think that's pounds. No, yeah, that's pounds. 210 pounds of tomatoes, and so on and so forth.
And those are like numbers that you project because of the formula you have put in, as far as your row, your length of your rows and that type of information. Is that because
Not
you
yet.
projected? Where does that number come from? Is that like a projection?
Yeah, this is just a projection. So this comes from previous data where I said, oh, back here, I don't know what, oh, here we go. Back here, I said this was like how much I sold at farmer's market. And then I don't have the spreadsheet in here, but I had a previous spreadsheet of how many CSA units they had done like years before. And I took those numbers and I made a projection for total farmer's market sales. So I said, for farmer's market for the whole year, or for the whole season, I wanted to sell 1,000 heads of lettuce essentially. And then for CSA, I wanted to have 2,000 heads of lettuce for my CSA that season. And then, so that means those two numbers added up, I get 3,000 heads of lettuce.
With the total units, you can go back, kind of backtrack and see how much that would equal for those particular dates.
Yeah, essentially.
I guess
think
he's
is
asking
what I'm
how are
saying.
you, those projections are just from last year's, what you
Yeah.
actually grew last year.
They're from what I grew last year, plus usually a little more, right? Because you want to have a little bit of buffer, but also you're like, hopefully they liked my lettuce and they'll buy more of it this year. So you always add a little bit more, truthfully.
It's just like almost like a projected financial budget, you
Yeah.
know?
You're like, this is how much I want to make, and because I want to make this much, this is how much I have to grow. And that's just the first stage. It might make more sense if I keep going, but good questions, and keep asking them.
Yeah, just getting.
Right, so from here, then you get into something that looks kind of similar to the map. Actually, sort of. This is where I break it down into how many units. So over here, I have, okay, let me actually start from here. First we have crops. I did break it down across varieties. I like to do that. Yes, I am crazy. Why I grew, I don't even remember how many, like 12 different heads of lettuce. It's just for farmer's market because they all look cool and are fun, and there's summer crisps, and then there's some that do better in the spring, blah, blah, blah. But this is something that I like to do because it helps inform my seed worksheet, right? But it isn't necessary. I would say at the bare minimum at least have like just the crop. But this tells me like how many of each variety I am going to have. I overthink. I'm an overthinker. I get really into the weeds of things. I like to like really know as much as I can. So my crop plans tend to reflect that. But again, yours do not. You don't need to get this into it. I would say the most important thing is just having, again, your crops. You know, you can have some notes on days of maturity. Definitely the rows per bed. Your in-row spacing is usually in inches. I would say always have a designation. Don't.
Can I, real quick, I know Lisa keeps saying that, you don't have to be that involved with your crop plans, but it's fine, but as you keep doing it, you guys are gonna figure out what you want to know in your growing operations that you can add to those spreadsheets. These are things that through her years of growing, she realized, okay, I wanna know this in my process, so when she says those things, that's her brain working as far as what she needs to know for her growing operation and for her peace of mind as well.
Yes, peace of mind for sure. And it does, like, again, thank you, Hyatt, for saying that, because over the years you do, you get your basic thing done, you're like, cool, well, I really wish I had grown, like, you start dialing in, and this is where the dialing in happens, where you're like, I want to grow a specific amount of this variety, because I know it does better or sells better versus this one. So like I know this is gonna be more popular or this is more specialty and higher price point maybe. So it is, and over the years you do dial in, and that is, I should have prefaced that. Yeah. You don't need it at first, but you're gonna want it if you're going year over year.
I have a question. When you started out, was your farmer that you worked with this detailed or did you say, he's too disorganized, I need to keep detail?
Honestly, like this crop plan, I think this is the one sheet I got from him.
So he taught you all these things?
It was actually multiple farmers. So I worked for, the benefits of working for more than one farm are that you get to see a lot of different ways to do it.
Okay.
And I highly recommend it. Although I will say it's always great to work in one place for a few years too, because then you kind of see season over season, that kind of knowledge is really valuable as well. So I would say this whole crop plan actually came from my experience of 3 different farms.
Okay.
Yeah, and I kind of just pulled it together, reorganized it in a way that made sense to me. That's why I openly share my crop plans, because they're not mine, and I think crop plans should be openly shared, because they're nobody's, truly, and it's all of ours. And so I'm pretty much an open source, because like the people have been an open source of information for me, so why should I hold that back, right? That's my mentality. I know not everyone thinks like that maybe, but this crop plan is truly and this is one I have also shared, I think, with Hyatt, I think from our January, and I would happily share it again. But this, yeah, it's just like a collection.
The folks you worked with probably wouldn't have been able to hire people if they didn't have this record keeping.
Truly. Yeah, to have a crew, you have to have a plan. I mean, anyone who has a crew knows this. You know, the worst thing is showing up every morning and having a bunch of blank stares at you, and you're like, I don't know what we're doing. And they're like, cool, we don't know what we're doing, and we're not motivated, and you are uninspiring. So there's nothing worse than that. So the best thing to be inspiring and to keep motivation is to have a plan and follow it. Follow it even when it sometimes doesn't make sense. Again, in the middle of the season, this is the blanket assumption. You're gonna make changes. Your crop plan is not gonna look the same always. Like my long season crops are pretty much where I map them to be, but you know, all those like short succession bok choy, radishes, those always change. So the assumption is things are going to happen, things are going to change. It's about having this plan in place so when things are crazy, you have something you can fall back on, something you can hand a crew member and say, just go do this while I sit here and cry a little bit, think about what to do next, which fire to put out next. Okay, but back to this, again, these numbers represent units, these represent row feet actually, and it is just, this is the total of all of these numbers, if that makes sense. So everything highlighted purple is the total of each variety, and everything is in row feet here. Yes, I am crazy, don't ask me why. I have 24 row feet of this red wing that I'm planting on this date, and this is all planting dates. So on April 13th, I was doing 600 row feet of onions. This is in Massachusetts, in the Berkshire Mountains, so this is totally different than Texas. You would not be planting onions in April. I mean, you could be, but I don't recommend it. But yeah, so that's what this is. Each one of these, again, represents a date, how many row feet of every single variety I'm doing. This is total bed length, or row length. I guess I should say those are total beds, my bad. And then this is total full beds, so it's like, I know in this system I had permanent beds, so I knew I had 6 full beds of onions. Again, that was just me going a little extra, because it helped me picture it easier. This is your total row feet, and then this is the total number of plants. This is, again, a formula. This is a formula based on the numbers that you have here in your in-row spacing. So I'm, again, gonna share this with everyone. You're all gonna have access to this, so you can have your chance to like piece it apart, figure it out. But are there any just general questions? I know we could get maybe in the weeds a bit, and hopefully I haven't lost everyone.
You said, so the purple is like, okay, onion has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the second purple is a different set of plant, and then it starts to
That's
variety.
an addition.
Is that what it's how I see it, or no?
Yeah, so this
the
is,
onion is a 4-row onion and a Capricorn onion?
yeah, so this meant I was doing 100 bed feet of forum onions, 100
Okay.
bed feet of copra, red wing, Elsa Craig, I mean, these are my favorites. A lot of these are also, when you look at this crop plan, specifically, onions, don't always follow this one because it's Massachusetts, don't follow these varieties.
Because we have short days.
Yes, exactly. These
So I'm
are
sitting here looking at the
mostly,
names of those, I'm like, we don't know where those.
no, these are mostly long days. You could get away maybe with this one, and it's a really fun, like, honestly, better, it's like it's an Italian heirloom type onion, and it looks like a big old shallot. Tastes so good, it's like the best. It's a midday onion. I think you can kind of get away with it here. I grew it 1 year to some success. But yes, this is a total bed feet, and then this translates here, where I've added up across the whole, if I had more planting dates for onions, it would be added up across the whole row to this number, and then I divide that by 100, because each one of my beds was 100 feet long. So I just was like, okay, I know I have, this is a just for me thing. You don't need this total full beds. But the total row feet's really nice because that is a number that comes from knowing your rows per bed. So you know how much row feet is different than how much bed feet, because you might have more than one row in a bed, right? And then this tells you how many total plants. Again, some of this information is redundant. A lot of this time, like how my brain works is I like to look at a page, kind of have sort of like all the information on one page. This number, you're gonna see like total plants a couple times in my spreadsheets. But like Haya was saying, it's just sometimes how your brain works. Again, you don't always need all this information, but I really like this because it told me like, and this will make sense for mapping, how many beds I needed for each crop. And so then when I looked at my garden or my farm, I knew like, okay, somewhere in this farm, I need to account for 6 beds of onions during this time, if that makes sense. And it kind of builds, like the whole thing builds on each other. So I'm gonna keep going and then well, I kept looking at you, but like I can keep answering questions, but let's keep going and then maybe it will start making sense, but then
I had a question about the total bed length. So you got total bed length and then total full bed.
total bed length is
The length of the bed.
in the feet. Total
Feet,
bed length is the
okay.
number of feet,
And then-
bed feet.
Okay, then.
Number of beds is like how many beds.
That's,
Yeah. And then total row length is how many rows, how long each of the rows are. So if I had 6 rows, I would have, and they were 100 feet long, then I'd have 600.
So Laffy, remember during the internship, some of like the carrots, for example, there were multiple rows in one bed.
Right.
So that's the row length versus the bed length. So you could have 6 rows in one bed, or you could have 1 row in one bed, depending on what it is you're growing. Like the tomatoes were in 1 row in one bed, but then the other crops, the onions, all the stuff, there were multiple rows in one bed length. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just,
If you were doing row to row cropping, just
Make
row
sure.
cropping, you wouldn't even have the beds down there. It would just be row leg. I put the beds in there because it'll make sense a little bit later, but I map out my whole farm. So I start out with my projections. I know how much I need to grow. I know how many beds of it I need. And then I go into my map and then I map it all out for the whole season. So that's like kind of where the steps go. But let's keep talking about it. But let me keep going. This is gonna be pretty similar to what we already worked on. Again, it's, we're just trying to figure out what our greenhouse state is. So that's when we're gonna seed in the greenhouse. This is the days to transplant or how many greenhouse days it needs. Bed length, row, in-row spacing. Don't ask me why I have different numbers for safety factors. This I did get from a farmer and it was based on how expensive seed was. Right now I just do 1.1. Just that I'm all about uniformity. Tray size is the number of cells in a tray. Here I was soil blocking, so that meant I was using like 60 soil blocks in a tray. If you have just a standard tray, it'd be like 128, 70, 72, 36. And then this is a formula for how many trays I need of it. So this is where it kind of starts going into like, okay, if you can get all this information in, you can literally hand this to your crew member and be like, get me 1 tray of the 60 cell blocks of this variety, go. And that's what we're going for.
Does everybody know real quick what soil blocking is?
No.
It'll be.
Sorry
easier
to
No,
squirrel you there.
It is honestly the most forgiving way to start seeds, in my opinion. This is
Iman, you were in our
it's-
class where we,
It's basically just blocks of soil, and then they have, it creates like obviously natural airways, so it's like it relies on air pruning to keep the roots kind of from growing into each other. I don't know if they do it anyway, but anyway, yeah, it helps a lot with keeping things aerated. In my opinion, it is like the most forgiving, but you have to really like monitor them. It is so easy to let them dry out, and once they dry out, ooh, it is a real, if we're being recorded, it's a real pain. You kind of have to do a gentle soaking and hope it all doesn't disappear. Anyway, so just don't let them dry out. And honestly, truly one of the most forgiving. You can buy them as small as like the tiny, I think it's like 1 inch or ½ inch. I start all my tomatoes in that, even to this day, because I have a very tiny greenhouse. But you can get them as big as like, I want to say like 4 inches.
yeah.
Even bigger, actually. I never had the biggest one.
I haven't had the bigger ones.
And you can just keep potting them up into each soil block. It's really fun.
I also think it's a
and
great
it's-
way to try to help divert the whole plastic
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
And they
You
last.
can buy plastic trays to put them in, but you can also build wooden trays. That's what we used. They do take up a lot of space storage-wise, but if you have space, why not? Okay, we're gonna keep trucking. This is a seed worksheet. I'm not gonna get into it because it's not really the most vital thing you need. Just know that, yeah, it's too much information. I'm gonna keep moving. This is the map. Okay, so we got our projections. We know how many units we want to grow to make a certain amount of money. We know now how many beds we need of each thing. And so then we come into here, and the map and the crop plan, all that information I just said does inform how I make this map. But sometimes I go back and I change things in my crop plan because I'm like, it doesn't quite fit. So don't be afraid. It can all be like a working document and all in all. And like sometimes I'm like, the one thing I probably don't change as much is like how many units I'm gonna grow, but I might shift things around. Like for instance, I'm like, hey, I can make just as much money if I grow just a few more tomatoes, maybe a couple beds less of lettuce, and I can save that sort of bed space. So there is some kind of give and take when you're creating this crop plan, but for the most part, those are the steps that you're gonna take. So this is one of my maps. This is for the pick your own garden space because I refused to pick beans for my CSA. I said, y'all are picking them, not me. If I'm picking beans, I'm selling them at the market. And that's because it was just me and one other person doing this whole thing. This is my tunnel. So this was we called it the Rolling Thunder because the farmer was really into Bob Dylan. This is my block 1. So as you can tell, there's a lot of white space in here, right? And that's because, again, I'm not growing because I already have pre-bought stuff. I'm growing because I have a certain number of units in mind, and I'm only growing to that unit or that price. Or the price, to the unit, because we already figured in price. So that means there is some blank space in here. To be honest, what it looked like in the season, there wasn't a lot of blank space, to be honest, because I was like freaking out, and I was like, it's never enough, and I'm just gonna throw in some arugula. And I would panic plant sometimes. Don't recommend that. Do not panic plant. Plant or panic water. 2 of the worst things you can do as a farmer. So yeah, this just accounts for, again, a lot of white space because I'm only trying to grow a certain number of units. I didn't necessarily need all the bed space all the time. This was block 2. As you can see, I grouped things like high succession crops. I put all in one block, and I rotated those blocks. And then block 2, these were my some succession, but mostly like greens, long season cabbage, and then I had some solanaceous. I did eggplants outside. I only had 1 tunnel, winter squash, and then I always had 1 block in cover crop.
When you say block, you mean about bed?
No, by block I just mean a designated area, so it's like maybe like a quarter to half an acre each block. And a block can be anything. It can designate 10 beds. 2 beds.
So
Or
each
2 acres.
section at the farm was a block, like, so the one that was closer to the parking lot was 1 block. The one on the other side was another block, so.
Just a certain amount of space.
Yeah, and it's just to help organize information. Again, if I had my whole garden mapped on one Excel spreadsheet, I would have just died, probably. My head would have exploded, yeah.
So at the end of one of these green bars, you're not harvesting anymore, you have the white space. What are you
Yes.
doing with that, space? Are you like cover cropping, are you is it just mulch it and move
She's
on?
panic planting.
I was
Throwing
panic
random-
planting. This is the block. These blocks all pretty much looked like this, record keeping wise. You know, some of the planting dates might have been different. But all my long season crops are pretty reliably always in the place they're mapped to be.
Oh.
This is why I always group my high succession crops together. It's because this is not what it looked like when I actually did the whole season. I had a lot less of these white spaces because, you know, sometimes things fail. So instead of it going the full whatever 5 weeks, maybe it failed in week 2. So I put something else there, you know, that I knew I was planting on that date. Maybe I was like, oh, well, since the lettuce didn't make it, maybe I'll throw in my, you know, this lettuce over here. And so this just got kind of convoluted. I just knew. I wish I had followed this plan again. Like, record keeping is key to this. That way you know, like, okay, this is what actually happened, and I can base a more realistic plan the next year on that. But going into this, I just knew, like, okay, if I just know I need to plant lettuce every week. At a certain point in the season, I just took things in the greenhouse and put it in whatever open bed there was. And then panic planted a little bit, because I was like, my CSA, I just want to give them everything, my life, my love. It's not enough. But yeah, but in my crop plan, the reason they're there is because I just didn't need that space. You can do something with it, but you also have to consider what's coming next. There's very few things, nothing here, right? You can maybe get like a succession of like lettuce and arugula obviously in there, but like 2 weeks, even 3 weeks here, what, you know, you can maybe do like baby arugula at like peak season. But it's very tough. So sometimes you do just have an empty bed. I am a big proponent of turning, like I mow. So like I'm a big proponent for like mowing and leaving it there until you're ready, keeping that soil covered, and then turning the bed right before you plant, or however you want to turn the bed. Maybe you don't tell.
Some people call it a chop and drop situation.
Yeah.
So you're letting the organic matter break down into the soil.
Yeah. It's a great way to recycle those nutrients because, you know, some of it's leaving with the harvest, but you can keep some of it behind through. I'm a big fan of getting something. I used a weed whacker on this farm. I didn't actually have I had a big old flail mower on the back of a tractor, but I was not going over these 30-inch beds with that big old flail mower. I would have knocked too much of it off.
Do you have like a routine for adding nutrients back in before you go to the next crop in that spot?
I do, yeah, and we're gonna talk about that actually in part 2 today. We're gonna get into amendments and stuff, but I do, yes. Any questions before? I kind of wanna wrap up the crop plans just for time, and also because, let's be real, crop planning is like, a little bit of a headache sometimes, but does anyone have any questions about, I'll just keep these 2 a little bit, either of these 2 crop plans that I showed y'all today?
Do you have templates for things?
Yeah, so I'm gonna share this 2021, my actual one, a copy of it, and I will share this template that we worked on together, and it has all the formulas already in it, and I'll share the slides, which also have the formulas in it. This is what I would say is like, this is the most basic one. If you're gonna do anything, even if it's a CSA, at least just map out where things are gonna go and know, you know, your greenhouse date at the bare minimum, you know, how many trays you need. This is like bare minimum. That's what I'd say.
And
Yes.
the green and the peak. The green is actually
Harvesting.
The green is
harvested,
growing.
growing,
Growing, yeah,
and
yeah.
the pink
Yellow's
is
the
the
plant.
days you harvest.
Yellow is planting.
Planting.
I don't know, is there a better color? I just color coded it randomly. Yeah, you can, whatever colors make sense to you, but essentially the
Green is
three
growing.
designations are
Yeah.
planting, growing, harvesting.
Okay.
So whatever
Okay.
colors work for you, yeah. Okay, any questions? Last minute, we're gonna jump in back into the PowerPoint.
What kind of shade cloth do you like? 40, 50?
I just use 50%.
50%?
So easier.
Yeah, it's 30%'s like, what are you doing? Why? Yeah, and then anything more, it's like, again, why are you growing what you need? There's 75%, 70% for? That was a bit, that was probably, there are probably people who are like, I love 70%. I love 50% though, it works for me. I don't know if anyone actually did a crop plan from the last class. We're gonna spend 10 minutes. You can either discuss your crop plan with your group. So this is their time to kind of like get loose a little bit. If you don't have a crop plan with you, or you don't want to talk about a crop plan, you don't need a crop plan, you can use these prompts to discuss your tentative crop plan. Or maybe you're like, I'm not there yet, but I'm just gonna have fun and imagine. Obviously, use those prompts, but you can also talk about more than just what those prompts have. But we'll spend 10 minutes. So hopefully y'all had a chance maybe to discuss your crop plans, or just maybe talk about like general ideas you have. I was just telling these gentlemen here, again, it is my firm belief that we all are gonna succeed together. So I'm an open book. I think I shared my email on this. If you're willing to wait a couple days for me to respond, I'm always available via email. I love talking with other growers. I'll say this boldly on camera. We just are not doing well enough as an industry of small scale urban ag, especially to be withholding information. It is definitely not to be in relationship with one another. So I may not always be available to, I'm very rarely available to really like go places, maybe to check out your property, but I'm always available to talk about things. So yeah, reach out, let me know. We're gonna move on from crop planning. We're gonna talk about irrigation. We're gonna take a small break, and then we're gonna jump right into pesticides, fungicides, all the amendments, all the applications. And then we're gonna end the whole workshop with procurement, and that's where you just get to watch me pull up a bunch of websites and be like, look how cheap it is here, and just like wig out about really cool places. Okay, so without further ado, irrigation. We kind of already talked about this here I was about to take a ride. We already kind of talked about water sources in our first part of this workshop, so we already maybe touched on some of this. This is information you want to know in addition to that. I like to talk about irrigation a lot because I like to demystify it, and it is something I'm still every single year try to get better and better at. Have less moving parts, a little more permanent. Like this year I'm burying my headers because I just keep running them over with a BCS and breaking my valves, and I'm tired of doing that. But every single year, for me, it even is a work in process, but it is such an easy thing to get started, and I'm a big fan of talking about it because I feel like it can sound intimidating, or you're just like standing in this aisle in Lowe's, or you're on like Drip Depot or Irrigation King, and you're like, I don't know, there's so many products here and so many numbers. But essentially, all you really want to know to start out is you just want to know your gallons per minute. There is, the classic bucket test where you fill up the bucket, see how long it takes. I recommend definitely getting like a flow meter. They're pretty inexpensive. I will say I did buy mine on Amazon, but you can source it from other places. You're gonna want to know that is like number one for sure. You're gonna want to know how much pressure is coming out of your system, because all of your parts are gonna be basically, you're gonna have to regulate that pressure so that none of your parts break, essentially, down the line. You're gonna wanna know how many row feet you're gonna be running, either drip lines or overhead, whatever your system is, you just wanna know how much area essentially that you're going to need to cover. And then if you are going to, if your source of water is literally like, I forget that Tofka, the guy was like, it's 2,000 feet away. I don't know who, he's not here, is he? Okay. Sorry if he's on this. I was baffled. I'm like, holy cow. So you do have friction loss that occurs, especially if you have like a small, basically a small tube, if you have definitely 1 inch and you're running that across 2,000 feet, you're gonna have some sort of friction loss. So the bigger your tube is, if you are running it 2,000 feet, you're just gonna have to get a bigger tube to run from that source to your field. Most people I encounter don't have that as an issue. They are more likely to like try to, dig a well, especially here in Texas. But it is something to consider, and there are calculators on Drip Depot, which we will look at a little bit later, that can help you figure that out. From there, this is kind of like your line, and there's a lot of photos of how to set this up. This is how I have mine set up. I use a Hunter Node timer. If you hate your timer, you will not hate your Hunter Node. It is an investment, but it is worth it, 110%. I've used every timer under the sun, I swear to God. This is the best one. It is a little bit pricey. You do have to change out the solenoid, but if you're comfortable just splicing wires together, it's really easy. But it is one of the best timers out there, and it is, without a doubt, my highest recommendation. From their source, you're gonna wanna go to your backflow preventer. I do have one on my Hunter Node valve, but you're gonna want one if you don't have that. You're gonna have your valve or timer. Sometimes it's just a valve for some people. I recommend having a timer because you're not gonna be there every day. I'm just gonna tell you that from the start, and you're not gonna be there sometimes in the most extreme weather. Maybe you're a one-person operation, you have the cold for 5 weeks, you're gonna want a timer. Filter if applicable. I actually don't use filters, and I use pond water. And that's because I didn't want to keep cleaning out my filters. And also with how I have my system set up, I have, at the end of all my drip tape, I have a, basically like a, kind of like a, it's not a check valve, but a little valve where it uses pressure to close. Why can't I think of this? It's failing me off the top of my head. But it helps wash out anything in my lines, and then when the pressure builds up, it closes the valve, so I use that, and honestly, I haven't had an issue with not having a filter. This is really important. You want a pressure regulator, because a lot of your drip tape, especially drip tape, not necessarily overhead, is gonna be like maybe 10 PSI, maybe 15. You're gonna want that because your system pressure is more than likely gonna be too high, and you're gonna blow out all your drip tape lines if you don't have that. And then that goes straight to your system. Which is your header. I would say the minimum header width, like diameter, I should say diameter, for less than an acre is 1 inch. I would say that's minimum. I would say 1.5 is better. If you get any bigger than that, I mean lay flat is an option. I don't personally love working with lay flat. If you don't know what lay flat is, it's just a tube that literally lays flat. It fills up with water and then it goes flattens again. My header that I use is a poly tube, so it's pretty rigid. Again, this year I'm working on burying them, but you don't have to bury them, but I would not work with anything less than 1 inch, definitely not. From your header, you're going to go into, I'd like to use a barbed valve because I like having control, multiple points of control for what water is going where. For instance, like your valve here is just from your source to your whole system. That's turning on and off, and it's just going to your system, your whole field indiscriminately, unless you have valves somewhere down the line. So I like to put them, I like to just buy the barbed valve, stick it straight into the header, the poly tube, and then if like I have an open bed that has nothing in it, I just close that valve so no water runs through there. And then from there, you just go to your drip tape. And that's truly it. Fertigation considerations are important. So I fertigate, I've just used like the classic Venturi style. I mean, I can pull it up on volts. I don't technically recommend it. We are moving to a dosatron unit, which I do like dosatron, but your fertigation considerations, you need to either already have that established in line and have valves in place where it can bypass that, or you're gonna wanna set up your system where you can easily connect and disconnect your fertigation in your line. That may not make sense totally, you may not be able to picture that if you haven't used any sort of fertigation system. But just know that like when you are setting this up and you are like, I definitely want to fertigate down the line and not just do it by hand. I want it to go through my drip. You're gonna wanna make sure you either, that you set it up so that you can basically easily install it. Either every time you use it or just have it permanently there. I have mine permanently there sometimes, and sometimes I don't, which is why I'm switching to Josetrons. Or I would really like to. Your drip tape ratings. This is the number that, and we're about to open Drip Depot, so you can I'll show you kind of what you're gonna want to be looking for, but these are really the three things you're gonna see is your gallons per minute, and it's usually over 100 feet. Pretty typically, if you don't see over 100 feet, just assume it is. I feel like I haven't found anywhere that's different, but I think if it was gonna be different, it would say. Your pressure, your PSI, and then your thickness. This thickness is really just about, the thinner your drip tape is, the less likely you're gonna use it across multiple seasons. The thicker it is, the more likely you are. This has varied for me across time, but it's really up to you. Any questions so far before we jump into Drip Depot?
Can you say what you said again about the filter? You were like, there's something in there that'll open and help you clear the line, and then pressure closes it again. What?
So you're gonna have to your filter usually has like a bypass valve, so you can usually clean it. You can usually check your water pre-filter? Yes. But you're gonna have to clean out your filter if you're working with especially dirty water. The reason people have a filter is so that it doesn't clog up their lines.
Yeah.
And so what I use for my drip tape, I don't use just an end cap or some people cut the line, fold it. I've done that. I honestly still have a few lines like that in my field right now because I run out of my enders. But it is essentially just a valve that lets water go through it until the pressure builds up in the system and then it closes. And I'll pull it up on Drip Depot because the name is escaping me right now.
I can't picture it.
But it helps clear out my lines, so it lets all the water run through right, and then as the system, pressurizes essentially with water, it closes the valves.
Oh, this is something that goes at the end.
At the end of the drip
automatic.
tape. Yeah, it's just automatic. It's just a manual thing.
I got you.
Yeah, not electric. Yes.
What size of mill do you usually use that's been successful for your drip tape?
Well, I have used 8 mil when I didn't have a lot of money, and you just buy it year after year. I mean, I would fix it. Some farmers I worked for would have a certain number of fixes per line. They'd be like, okay, there's 5 fixes and then we toss it. I had endless amounts of connectors at that point, so I was like, I'll fix it until this thing really disintegrates. So I've used 8 mil, but that is really if you have rodents in the field especially that are chewing through your drip tape, it doesn't last long. I mean, nothing does with rodents, but it's usually a 1 or 2 season thing. I would say right now I have a mix of 8 mil and 15 mil. The 15 mil is my 6-inch emitter spacing and the 8 mil is my 12-inch. But I think because I'm I'm better resourced, I would do 15.
So the higher you go on this, I thought the mill was be lower, the lower the number, the thicker, but it's
No.
going the opposite direction.
Yes, opposite direction.
Okay.
And it's just the more thicker it is, the more expensive it is. That's really it. That's been the deciding factor for me in the past. Now I'm more I've had to unlearn some spending practices because I'm used to working on farms that had no money. I've had to unlearn that and relearn buying the right tool for the job. And I would do 15 mil. It's also more rigid, so it's easier to pop into the bar, versus 8 mil you kind of have to turn the water on to put it on, or at least that's what I do. So it's just more rigid. It lasts longer. You don't make it as easily if you're doing any sort of weeding. It's pretty good, but it is more expensive. That's the caveat.
Have you ever used or heard of Blue Mat irrigation systems?
Blue Mat? I don't think so, no.
They are, I wouldn't use, I don't think for this application, but like for home gardens that are a lot smaller,
That's Mark.
they have
Oh, it is not.
like ceramic cones at the bottom
What's it called?
that.
Okay.
So water can go in and out of these ceramic cones, right? And so as the soil dries, it starts to pull water. So there's a little valve at the top that opens as a result of that vacuum. And so it allows water then to go through the lines. And then once the soil is saturated and the ceramic cone is allowing water back in, that vacuum stops and it closes. So it's like an automatic,
Okay.
watering, but
Yeah,
not electronic. It's just based on the physics of what's happening.
yeah.
inside.
I've never heard of it, but I would definitely look into it.
What is it
called
Blue, they're called Blue Mat. We started carrying those last,
Let's look at, we have the
Summer.
World Wide Web.
yeah, BLU.
Is that it?
I think you take the E, out.
Blue Mat?
Yeah, there it is, sorry. Yeah, and our customers like it. They also have this thing where you turn the water bottle upside down and it kinda does the same thing, it lets that trickle.
Okay.
But, yeah, those.
Ceramic sensors, nice. I've done the ceramic tubes. It wasn't a sensor though, it was, you filled it with water and it was like a slow release, but we broke them all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, they break so easily.
Yeah, I don't
This
think I
is
would use
interesting.
this on the farm. But what, maybe so, maybe they have, I don't know.
I'm gonna look at images.
Yeah, so that's all the stuff that we carry.
Blue Mat.
And they're
Okay.
really cool company, like, so when my customers come and they're like, oh, I want irrigation system for this, this and that.
Yeah.
I can just email them and they'll design it for me and then I can like purchase that whole package and provide it for the
Nice,
customer.
yeah.
Yeah. And then there are two options. You can do it pressure, so you hooking it up to their water hose, spigot, or it can be like a rain catchment system, so it's like gravity fed, so you put the rain barrel like up a little bit and then just connect the Blue Mat
Yeah. That's cool.
below it.
Have you seen it on a large scale, or just is it purely garden,
I believe that,
marketed for gardens?
no, I think that they use it for big operations as well, but since I normally work with gardens, that's the only way that I'm experienced with it. But yeah, they do pretty complex applications.
I'll definitely look into it. It's hard because just for doing it so long, it's hard to rely on something that's not battery or gas powered. I'm just kidding. But I would be interested. I would maybe try it out on some raised beds first and see what happens. Yeah. Can you hook it up to anything larger than a microtube? Does it hook up to large, like 5/8 drip tape? This looks like
I
mostly
don't know,
microtube.
I don't know, because again, I've only used it in garden applications,
Yeah. Okay.
but you
Just
have to
put
like,
larger system or something in the table, so.
But there's a little really,
but see, at the top of those carrots,
sorry.
how the tube that's going through them is really tiny, the next image.
This one.
Yeah, so the tube that's going through is pretty tiny. Oh, Walmart's carrying this, that's interesting. And
Yeah, you know, they
Yeah.
carry bits and pieces of it, but not
Oh.
the whole system.
Interesting.
Same with like,
You're
Blue
the one,
Walk.
they carry just a certain portion of it, because I went to another landscaping guy over off of 30 for the whole setup
Yeah.
when I saw it here.
Last week we went to Lowe's, Home Depot, and I still had to order pieces.
Pieces
online
up, yeah.
Because we just added a couple rows, so.
It's a place right over off of 30, I forget the name of it, it's a landscaping place.
I know,
Site one.
is it
I
Site
think it's
One?
like one,
Yeah.
I went there when
Yeah.
I saw it in
Yeah.
York, when I was here,
Mhm.
when y'all did the
Irrigation
the
workshop?
solar thing.
Oh, right.
And, he talked about it, and so I went over there, and they had it.
Mhm.
They have like the cheapest PVC,
And,
not wholesale.
it's not announced yet, but I think he's doing another class
Is it?
with our 2,500 gallon tank, and we're gonna run lines through our melon pads. Keep an eye out. for it,
Okay, I will.
yeah. I think we're doing a class on
Cause I think we're gonna hook up our 5 whatever gallon system.
solar power.
I know, we're being it's a lot of changes are going on with us.
I'll think about it.
Change is good.
We got
Especially if it's gonna be more efficient,
We
yeah.
just finished ours
I know.
this week, yeah. All upside and everything.
Hell yeah. If you guys don't already know, Drip Depot has grower FAQs, frequently asked questions, and guides. So if you're ever like, oh, I don't really know what this person is talking about, they have sample layouts, which I find again, a lot of this is like just to get you a baseline, just to get you like something, a blueprint to start. Obviously, your system is going to maybe require something different, potentially, but it is going to be a really good baseline to at least get you going. So they have a lot of great examples, but I wanted to come here and talk about drip tape because I wanted to show you all the numbers and what you're going to be looking for. So this is just like a standard, right, drip tape. Drip Depot is a great place to source things from, but it's not the cheapest place, so I usually use it as like, I say like this is a great reference point because it is very user friendly, but you're gonna be able to select your wall thickness and just know like there's different brands of drip tape, so just shop around because different brands sell, you know, different drip tape at different mills, but let's just say we're gonna go 8 mil for today. Emitter spacing, that's how far apart your emitters are. You have a lot of variety here. They even do it up to 24, 36, 48. Typically most growers, I think, max out really at 12. And that's because usually a lot of things that require a lot of extra spacing still need a lot of water. So I would never say get more than 12 personally if you're doing intensive growing. This is where those numbers I talked about earlier are going to apply. So this is where you want to know your gallons per minute. So if you say, let's say you have pretty standard, maybe like 50 gallons per minute, this is like you've got a beefy system, this is not city water. That means you can basically, so this is 50 GPM. So if you have 0.37, let's just pick that one, 0.37 gallons per minute, that's over 100 feet. First I'm gonna do the math. If you have beds that are less than 100 feet, all you're gonna do is solve for X. So X GPM. So let's say you have like 80. All you're gonna do is solve for X to find the gallons per minute that you're actually putting out into your field. So when it says, that's why I like to do 100-foot beds. I don't have them right now. But if I had any operation, I would always stick with 100-foot beds because it's easier for crop planting, math, everything, including drip tape. But basically, so if you have 0.37 gallons per minute per 100 feet, and you have 50 gallons per minute total in your whole system, I don't have my calculator with me. Basically, what you're going to do is going to take that across, going to divide 0.37 by the 50, and that's going to tell you how many lines you can basically run before you max out. And then of course you're going to have 10 psi, that's your pressure regulator. So if you have, no matter how much pressure you have, just buy a 10 psi pressure regulator. I don't need to write that down, you already see it. Just buy a 10 psi pressure regulator, and then if you need more, basically then you're going to go into number of zones. So if you have basically more beds than what, let's say you need more than 50 gallons per minute for your whole field, that's when you set up multiple zones. So you're just gonna basically duplicate what you set up from one zone across the other zones. I feel like I'm not explaining this very well, so please feel free to ask questions. And then that's how you're gonna be able to water your whole area. And those zones are gonna go off at a different time. That's where the timers come in, because you cannot run all of your whole field media at the same time. Does that make sense?
Because of the pressure.
Because of the gallons per minute, not the pressure.
So, okay.
Your pressure is what gets the water there, but the gallons per minute is your flow rate. That's how much is coming out.
But if a lot of them are going on at the same time, does it?
If you have like a ton of, if you have a lot of land and you have let's say you're on city water, which is typically like, what is it, 17 gallons per minute? Something, it's like in the teens. You may not have enough gallons per minute, so you may not have enough water coming out to do your whole field at the same time. So that's where you set up zones, and that's where you're gonna have like multiple timers, multiple headers generally, just to get your whole field watered. And you have to set up the timer so they go off at different times. Because your gallons per minute is fixed. It is a fixed number, it is not going anywhere.
It's what's coming out of the spigot, or whatever source.
It's what's coming out of the spigot, it's what's coming out of your drip tape, yeah. So your gallons per minute coming out of your spigot or your source, you wanna know that number so that you know how many lines you can set up per zone before you max out. If that makes sense.
Do you find yourself changing those timings as the season, the weather changes?
Yeah, like how much I water.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely change how much I water across seasons. The thing that maybe changes how many lines I have going off at the same time depends on, I have two different, so for me personally, I have a 0.37 gallons per minute per 100 foot, 12-inch spacing. And then I have a 0.67 gallons per minute per 100 foot for 6-inch spacing. So the amount of each of these drip lines that I have in the field varies literally across the season because I use these two different types of drip tape for different crops, if that makes sense. So for me, I have two zones. I have one set up for this and I have one set up for that, and that's because I have roughly 52.5-ish gallons per minute, so I can actually run my whole field at this if I do 2 lines per bed, but that's all I can do. So I have two actually zones, and then I have a third zone for my overhead sprinklers, which overhead is usually much different. That's on a different pressure regulator. It's on a 40 PSI. For me, I use Netafim sprinkler heads. Yeah, so I actually have 3 different zones going on. My fertigator, these two come off of the same source, and my fertigator is in line with that. It is ahead of the valve, if that makes sense.
Why the difference in the 0.34 and 0.67 between different crops and spacing?
I would have liked these to be the same, but it was just where I sourced it from. It was 0.67 for some of the cheapest stuff, and I just knew, like, I did the calculation, and I was like, yeah, I have enough. And I prefer to have these on 2 different zones anyway, because this usually is like baby bok choy, and then this is like full-grown fruiting tomatoes. And so those have just totally different water requirements anyway, so that's why I have 2 zones also. Excuse me.
Okay, but in general, if you were setting this up from scratch and you're like, okay, this stuff is 12-inch space, this stuff is 6-inch space, you would still just buy all 0.67 gallons per minute, take.
If I were starting off, I would stick with, just trying to make a uniform gallons per minute across all your drip tape. And you can buy 6-inch drip tape for your 0.35, I mean 0.3, this is 0.37, which is crazy. 6-inch, let's see what flow rates they have it, 0.75. It's tough. I've seen 6-inch with 0.3, whatever, it's usually 3.4. But if you just think about it, like 6 inches apart, you're gonna just be releasing more water generally. So it's typically going to be found with higher gallon per minute rates anyway, but you can't, I have seen 6-inch with 3.4 because I've thought about mine, to be honest. Yes. Sorry, yours the line. You first, please. Or hi, how about you?
If you haven't already, can you touch on overhead versus drip tape? Because specifically because, you know, within the USDA programs and a lot of the stuff that's being pushed out, they're heavily pushing drip irrigation. I personally like overhead spraying for irrigating for a lot of things. I feel like we've had better results with it. But I do understand, you know, especially because we were harvesting so much and using a harvester to where we had to pick up drip tape every time we harvested and then lay it back down and get tangled up. It was almost a time suck.
Yes.
That was the same kind of question I was gonna ask. What the heck do you do with the drip tape when you're planting or harvesting or between different, I mean, it gets in the way.
It does get in the way. I mean, yeah, it does get in the way. You have to be careful not to nick it. That's why sometimes that is, for someone prone to nicking your drip tape, you might want to get the 15 mil instead of 8 mil. Some of that just comes with time, and again, it's about whatever system you want to set up that you can afford, and you're just going to learn how to work around it. Typically, I don't want to say that to say like just go buy things that are inefficient and just figure it out, because I know that's like a lot of under-resourced farms do that, and they have to, and I get it, but I would say for drip tape, I've never had an issue with it, but it's because I've worked with it for so long. But that's not to say it's the best thing.
Can you pull it into the pathways during?
Oh,
Definitely.
certainly. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I'm flipping beds, I don't leave it there. I definitely pull it to the side, or if I'm like done with it, I'll just pull it off completely. For harvesting, I typically don't do anything with it. I just work around it. I do think drip tape is. So I've worked with both overhead and drip tape. Again, I can only speak to preferences of what I like to use with what. Overhead is really great, obviously if you're seeding a lot of things, to get things to germinate, really great. Helps cool things down. Your water quality is really important. Currently, my water it burns my plants actually in the summer if I use it on overhead, so I do stick with primarily drip tape in the majority of my growing season. I mean, perks of drip tape, of course, they say like, you're saving money, you don't have as much evaporation loss. You can do buried drip lines if you have like the implement. You can bury your drip lines under your plants and your soil. I don't actually remember exactly your question.
I was just saying
specifically.
the verses, overhead versus just drip tape, because, where drip tape may be necessary, where, I guess it just goes back to a preference. But like within the USDA, they've been pushing drip tape because of water conservation kind of thing. But for us, like we did both, but we always had better success with overhead spray.
Yeah.
We did a lot of direct seeding though.
I will say with overhead, your limiting factor might be your gallons per minute, because it does require a lot, usually if you're trying to cover a lot of space. It depends, you could get like micro sprinklers, but I don't typically recommend those. Yeah, I think it's just really what you got. You gotta know your water quality, you gotta know how much water you're gonna have, what your pressure's gonna be. You may not even have the pressure to run the type of overhead sprinkler system that you want that would be effective. I don't know if I can speak to which one I prefer. I use both, is what I could say. Yeah, I have found though that I can get away with more with drip tape of a variety of emitter spacing than necessarily overhead. But I do like to talk about, I haven't used it yet, but the Sumi Soaker is something I'm very interested in. It is just a line, and it's from Modern Grower. I'm advertising it, I guess, already. But I haven't used it yet, but I'm interested in this because one thing I don't love about overhead is I have Netafims and I have collars for them so that they don't spray in a certain direction. So I always recommend getting collars. If you're gonna use the Netafim, you can't do that as much with wobblers. I generally have gotten away from wobblers for the most part.
Why is that?
I have had less issues with Netafim. With wobblers, I've had issues like where parts kind of break down a little bit, or the wobble function of it doesn't always, especially through
The squirt part sometimes gets clogged up.
It gets clogged up, and you have to go out there and you gotta flick it a few times to get it to go. And I've never had that issue with my Netafims, to be honest. I cannot speak to the mechanics of it and why they're different and why one's better than the other, personally. But I just know, like with wobblers, I had to mess with them a lot more than I have had with the Netafims, and the collars are a big deal. So you're not spraying your pads, you're not spraying outside of the area that you want to spray. Is a big thing that you can't spray.
No, you're good.
Interestingly enough, we always use wobblers, but what I noticed about them is that when you started changing the stand that they're on is when we started having issues, and we just had the low kind of triangle stand. We never had issues with them, but, and cause it was sturdy, and these like kind of posts that just come up off the ground are wobbling, the posts are moving with it as
Yeah.
well. And I'm not saying I know that that's the issue, but that's just as from my observations, it seems like they just need a more sturdy,
Yes, they do.
foundation to.
We welded ours to an iron pipe that we then welded we welded forks on the bottom of an iron pipe and screwed it on. And that's the only way we could get ours to really stand. I'm so sorry.
Are y'all fertigating from the overhead as well?
We did through those wobblers.
Does it affect the leaves at all, like when you get the fertilizer on them?
Excuse me.
No. Well, it also depends on the time of day. Like, you don't wanna do it in the middle of the day, you know,
Yeah.
so it was the first thing in the morning thing we did, like at the crack of dawn. So the heat and everything wasn't affecting the leaves, but yeah, we just overhead and it was fine.
It was like fish emulsion or?
It was a compost tea blend, so there was, fish.
Smelly.
Yeah, fish emulsion, we put some blackstrap unsulfured molasses in it, there was, worm castings, all the different stuff.
Yeah. There's an alternative, I think Biomin is something we use, and it's a soy-based alternative to fish emulsion that doesn't smell as bad. If you're concerned about raised or gardens and public spaces.
There many
Farms are
times,
different,
I
yeah.
had compost tea up, cause we were brewing them in 350-gallon
Yeah.
tanks. And I had to stand on a ladder, and plenty of times when I opened the lid, it just it's so gross.
Yeah. This is what I use, the Netafim MegaNet. I'm a big fan. I've never had issues with it, literally ever. The different colors just represent a different diameter that it can spray, but in general, does anyone have questions? And then I'll roll it, of course. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. I have on the screen the
214
flush valve that I use
796 6170.
for drip tape. It
Is
is
this used
expensive,
six-
especially if you're doing it at the end of every
Six,
line,
four,
and
four,
especially if
six,
your beds are
nine,
really
five,
short.
nine.
But I use this as an alternative to using a filter, because my filter mesh compatibility, I could have found a larger micron mesh, I guess, but I just went with this because I also have a slight hill, so it helps me from having water collect at a certain downhill spot, so it just like flush out, because I was having struggles with a wet spot downhill. So I tried this out to see if it would help. It did a little bit, but I mostly like it because it just, it works really great.
Those things are generally pretty effective.
They're really effective, yeah. I like them, I prefer this over a filter.
They're a little hard to use to get the,
Yeah,
pieces
you have to
together.
have the water running, and you have to be okay with getting wet when you're working sometimes.
yeah, if they're wet, they
Yeah.
do go together a little better.
Yeah.
So what does that do, that particular piece do for your downhill situation, what you were saying?
So if I had it closed off, it would just, the water would, in the downhill section, it would just collect and just, slowly seep in through the emitters, or out of the emitters. And so what I ended up having was like a dry, the top of my beds, or the uphill portion, were drier than my downhill portion. And I was irrigating for, obviously the uphill part, but this bottom part just kept getting wet and wet. This, whenever the pressure of the system releases, so when it stops, when the valve closes and the water stops flowing, it releases all that water. And so it just doesn't collect and seep out of your emitters. It was one way I could think of to try and mitigate it. The other way, I would have had to totally, which I probably should have done, bought the 1-inch size and put it at the end of my header instead, was my other option, but I would have had to reroute I would have had to plumb it to the other side of the field, and I just didn't want to do that. And I wanted to try these to see if it would work, because I genuinely like the idea of also having this
instead of like opening all your drip tape, right, like unscrewing the end cap or like, you know, popping off the sleeve, you can just, it flushes out your drip tape for you, like as soon as you're done. As soon as the system pressure releases, it just automatically flushes it. So you don't get that collection of dirt, essentially.
It's called a Permalock tubing end cap.
Yeah,
It's called
you
a
can-
flush valve.
You can find it cheaper than Drip Depot. I forget exactly where I sourced mine from. I'd have to look through my emails, but that's essentially what it is. But we're gonna get into spraying. We're gonna talk about amendments, applications, but first, we are, and this event. We are, how do we feel? We feel good about it. Oh, okay. Maybe later. We're gonna do another slides with friends, and it's gonna be all about spraying, essentially. So get into your groups, or yeah, I feel like we have some new groups, maybe potentially some added people. Go ahead, take a scan of that QR code, or type in slideswith.com/cress, CRESS. Hopefully we can wrap up in maybe 45 minutes and maybe take that tour that was offered us. I would love some walk in the sunshine. My throat is admittedly killing me. Parched.
Do you need anything?
Have some water. It's not from sick, it's just from, I think I'll be okay. I'll make it the next 45 minutes. Yes, but thank you. Actually, I left my coffee earlier. Oh, yeah, Alright, if everyone's in the group, we're gonna keep going. Spraying. Dun, dun, dun. As a group, this is basically, there's gonna be polls and word clouds. So I think they're gonna start off with actually a poll. So the first question is, will you be spraying? Will you be or do you spray is really what it is. Pesticides, fungicides, herbicides in your farm or garden.
I think it is absolutely necessary.
Maybe if you don't have one yet, what are your feelings about it essentially? Yes or no?
So I was thinking about, when you talk about spraying, you're like, oh, I do spray and, you know, whatever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but and I don't know where it's like in other places, but when I think here, when people hear spraying, they automatically think it's chemical spraying, like high intense chemical spraying.
Yes.
Is that what you're?
We're just leaving it open.
Okay.
But yes, we'll definitely get into the literal weeds of it. Or hopefully we can foster that kind of conversation. Alright, has everyone answered? I don't see any.
I don't see any answers.
I don't see it.
There's no way to answer it.
Do we answer with the emojis or?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
My bad, y'all.
There we go.
Here we go.
I was like,
I was like, wait a minute. Okay. Okay, so we have majority, is this, it looks like undecided, 2 and 1 yes. Is it important to you to use only organic or OMRI, it's the Organic Materials Research Institute, certified products?
For me, yes.
Okay. Yes, somewhat, okay. And now this is where the word cloud comes in. So what to you are the pros of using pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides? You can type in more than one word, more than one phrase. Pesticides, this is basically just the things you maybe spray generally. These are for obviously pests, this is for disease, and that's for weeds.
Yeah. Work side needs to.
Less like loss. Something that's convenience usually. There's always this, I mean, I haven't figured out what it is yet, but it's something that it's on the mulberry trees. These brown spots show up on the leaves. And then everything I grow near that damn tree
Alright,
gets
take 20
that
more
same
seconds.
spot and eventually it kills it.
Throw some words up there.
I got more red tree in the backyard. Yeah, we sell those spots.
What is that? It irritates me and I'm like, maybe this year I need to figure out a fungicide that might help. I don't know what to do because I know what it is.
Too long anyway, but
No, we just,
have you tried to
in this first thing, how
Your
many,
moment.
applications do you do?
get more of it?
So,
That one volunteered itself, so my neighbor has a
Alright,
little
10 more
tree,
seconds.
and then I started
I'll
gardening
throw in
beds
some last
in the
words.
middle of our
We're
yard,
supposed to do.
and a mulberry tree started growing in the middle of it, so I just.
Just type in
oh,
words.
here it is.
Just yeah, type in words,
I was looking at it.
or phrases.
Yeah.
Just say something.
Mental health.
ABCD.
Just keeps low,
Because that
Wow, can
problem
we
is like.
redo the
first
recording?
grade.
right?
I'm gonna edit these out, this portion.
There's a lot of actual
So just put prevention.
Can there be a caveat screen? Like, presenter is crazy and tired.
I'll just have a name dancing
Okay.
across the screen.
We got some words, let's see. Cost. I assume that means it will be more cost effective to spray? Or was that a con?
Cost as far as not losing crops to
Cool, okay.
disease.
Maintenance, yes. Less loss, oh shoot, why do I'm so sorry. I just need to not touch it. More control over crops, prevention, yes. Less pest pressure, less weed pressure. Mental health. Guys, I have been I've been all over the spectrum of spraying, not spraying. I have been the farmer with the headlamp, squashing Colorado potato beetles out of my potatoes and eggplants. Mental health, I can't go back to that. I'm just gonna say that right now. You will not find me there. And that is very, very relevant. Control of undesirables is, I like that language. And convenience, yes, all good things. Now, what are the cons of using pesticides, fungicides, herbicides? And this is not specific.
Perception. So like if you tell people I'm spraying on my farm, they might be like, I'm special. Some soil like risk factors. Damage to beneficials.
They make people sick. That stuff can make people sick and have long-term effects.
Maybe like ecosystem impact. So like it's not just impacting the potato beetle or whatever, it's everything around there.
Health, it causes disease.
Potential to be like impacted by a class action lawsuit 20 years from now. Did your tongue fall off, after spraying this stuff?
Alright, take 30 more seconds. Type in.
After 3 years, figure it out.
Yeah.
Sorry, y'all, I'm being an old lady, I'm cold.
It also messes with people's health, like Roundup and stuff like that. It doesn't allow the natural. You put the natural, it messes up.
Alright, take 10 more seconds. Type in those last couple letters, last words.
Just say something.
Ignore the
You're doing it.
phlegm. Alright. go. Cost. Okay, so now I assume, oh, wait. No. Okay. Cost I assume to mean because they're expensive in this case. Okay, I see some ecosystem, impact ecosystem, the environment. Who typed those in? Raise of hands. This is not a call out. Will you explain what that means to you? Like, what do you mean by that?
So like, you're not, let's say you're after the potato beetles, when you spray, you're not just only affecting the potato beetles.
You're affecting everything
Everything
around it,
in the
even
soil,
yourself.
right.
I'm an allergy queen, and it's all because I work outside, and you feel that stuff.
Do you, when you guys talk about what you're spraying, are you speaking just generally non-organic or organic, or are you like
Everything.
everything?
Yeah.
Okay. So like broad spectrum sprays specifically. Okay. Ineffective and over effective? I assume that is in line, over effective is in line with what y'all are saying, like it's maybe too broad spectrum, kills too many things, including beneficials, potentially. Who put ineffective? Okay, will you speak to that?
They can be, I also said waste when used too late.
Yes.
By the time you see the problem, it's too late
Mhm.
sometimes.
Very true. Preventative is always key, always. Okay, damage local ecosystem, I assume is in line with others, killing beneficials, and then who wrote perception? That's real, that's consumer based, yeah, they have some perceptions of it. Is that essentially what you mean?
Yeah.
Do you guys deal with that in your system? Do you feel like your consumers or markets feel strongly about spraying or not spraying?
I'm that consumer, honestly. I'm always
Yeah.
like, I spend 20 minutes like staring at a vegetable before I buy it because I'm like, I'm scared,
Right.
is this pesticide on it? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I also feel like that's why people come to like local farm stands in the first place.
Right.
It's because those people, if they didn't care, they would go to the grocery store
Right.
and like ask these
Right.
questions, That's why they're looking for local produce or maybe organic practice producers, even if they're not USDA certified,
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely. Do you feel like the perception like if you did spray, do you feel like you guys have chances to talk about it? Like I assume probably for the most part if we did spray or what we do spray if we spray is mostly organic in this room, almost entirely. I assume, okay. Do you feel like you have the capability and that public is open to an organic spray, or do you feel like no, they just don't want anything at all?
I feel like,
And
I'm
as
just
a
thinking
consumer,
from
yeah.
a consumer, I feel like I would be okay with that, even at the surface level, right? Because they can say, well, I only spray organic stuff, but you don't know what it is unless you're like on the farm looking at it.
Right.
So it's like,
Right.
it does help me just kind of like trust it more. And then I'm like, all right, I'll give you the $7, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not thinking that deep about it, but on the surface, I do want to have that like comfort of that label.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I do think consumers are more willing to, that kind of consumer is more willing to buy.
Yeah.
It's like 50-50, honestly.
Yeah.
I think some people kind of trust that, oh, we're using BT, which is, an
Yeah.
organic spray or something to
Yeah.
help with our cabbage worms.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't really know,
They don't know what BT is.
yeah.
No, they don't. They just kind of, oh, it's organic.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they might say, oh, it's a spray and I don't want it. So I think it's really kind of split in the middle for
Yeah.
a lot of people, a lot of consumers at least.
But have you guys ever not sprayed because you feel like you get a higher price point, or like you can sell something for more money because it's not being sprayed? Does that factor into anything?
For me,
Decision wise, I guess, crop bearing wise even?
yeah. Unfortunately, I think it's kind of been, what's the word, like, maybe colonized? To where it's like you put an organic label on it and now instead of a $2 potato, it's a $7 potato.
Right.
I have taken advantage of that at the farmer's market in the, Dallas Farmer's Market.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I'm gonna do what y'all doing.
Yeah.
I want $5 for every seedling too.
Yeah.
Why not?
Definitely. Yeah.
So. Edit that out.
I've taken this part out, yeah.
See, Lisa said that I
Thank you.
believe that the public, because people are starting to get really sick, you know, I believe people are looking more into the whole system of everything. Like, for example, in farming, that they said in the 70s, they stopped rotating the ground. And you're supposed to rotate the ground. You're not supposed to force it to do what it does not do naturally, but we have become a consumer society, so we want everything without balance, and it's making people sick. You know, like if they say in Europe, people are they're not sick, but they're not sick like they are here, because we've kind of gotten away from, so that's why people are now overly cautious, because they are getting sick. It's come into their house. So,
Right.
yeah.
There's definitely, I mean, glyphosate I think is more regulated there, especially in recent years it's been like a ban, so, which is very different than here, and that is true. I noticed, I just wanna go back to the poll, who here does spray or will spray? Yes. And we assume organic when you say that. Who here was undecided? And is still undecided maybe? You're like, we'll see, okay, cool. Yeah, I love to have discourse over it because I am personally, again, I've been on both sides of this, this conversation, and I always joke like, if we had a debate on it, you'd probably win no matter what side you're on. Because I feel like it's always changing for me, but I will say like I spray, pesticides and fungicides, all organic certified or OMRI certified, at my farm, and it has been a night and day difference for me for what I can harvest, essentially my success rate. I did add, before we go to the chart, I did want to throw up, which y'all probably already know, because these are some growers in the room. Arbico Organics is a great place to start because they have just a really user-friendly, I would say, website. I never buy from them. I mean, if I source beneficials, I would buy from them, but I don't because I have an open field. We can talk about beneficials as part of this conversation. It's something that I'm having, I go back and forth on every single year, but you can look it up by pest and disease. So you can come here and you're like, okay, what do I need pest control for? Aphids, popular one. And it goes kind of into, honestly, a lot of great information for growers. I like it because they also, like, integrated pest management isn't just about spraying, but it's also not about just not spraying. It's about a lot of different concepts, like first and foremost, like knowing what you're dealing with. If you can in any sort of way physically provide physical barriers or environmental barriers before spraying is always really great. And then, of course, preventative is really great as low, like,
And I don't like garlic.
yeah. I never
spray
used
my
garlic
whole
berry.
yard
I don't know if
smell
anyone
like
uses
garlic.
it.
Use
Yeah.
what? I know. my
They talk
whole
about
yard.
predators, they talk about knockdowns, they just give it at like, okay, maybe you're like not dealing with it, but you wanna like approach it as a preventative measure. You know, maybe you can provide physical barriers, get some sticky traps, monitor. Maybe buy, this is them marketing their beneficials, you can definitely do that. I don't recommend it unless you are covering your bed. You can put the little like beneficial cards in the covered area, or you have like a greenhouse. But the thing with beneficials is they need a food source. So it's either the pest, you're never gonna get that 100% threshold. So for me, I would like beneficials for like maybe fruiting crops where like that 100% threshold, I don't necessarily need it. But like if I'm selling a bok choy, I need like 0% aphids on that. So that's where beneficials aren't always the best. So it's a complex conversation, I would say, but that's where I stand on it. But then you can go here. I like to source things from actually Seven Springs Farm Supply. It's cheaper in all accounts, and they have alternatives like I think Entrust is one of the most expensive. It's a spinosad. It's one of the most expensive sprays you're gonna get, and they have an alternative that's not regulated in every state, so you have to call them to order it, but it is okay to use in Texas,
and it's like way cheap, not way cheap, it's like 70, 80 bucks cheaper. But they also have these really great charts. Again, we're just looking at starting points. This is just to help you get started. I would print maybe these out, or if you don't wanna have the paper, download them, but it goes across common pests that you might deal with, and then the types of sprays. So it's like multi-purpose, biological, and then clays, oils, and soaps, and then they have a breakdown here of, don't really like fit in either of those. But it really is a helpful chart, because then you can kind of come across, like let's say as a directin, as a directin, that's like Azagard, it's neem oil essentially, is what that is, and it's, as you can see, effective across a lot of pests. So if you're working with a budget and you're like, okay, I can maybe only afford a couple things, neem oil is a great one because it's also a fungicide, not a super effective one, but it is a fungicide as well. I always say neem oil is a great one. Get definitely a pyrethrin to help you deal with anything that is an issue. It's not really used as a preventative. I use it as a preventative low-key because at a certain point in my season, it's the same thing, it's all the same thing. I'm not as much sold on spinosad, but you can definitely get spinosad. I found pyrethrin works just as, it's pretty effective. And spinosad has a very prohibitive cost barrier to it. But anyway, they have a chart for pests and they have a chart for disease management as well. So this can just help you decide like what to buy. And again, they are gonna be some of the cheaper prices online. They also have cover crop seeding, so much fun. But, excuse me, I wanted to bring up my chart and just show what I use and the type, that's too far. What I use in some of the records, so for us, I don't know if you guys have seen those sheets where you have to keep records of what you spray. It's like, you need to know your EPA number, you need to know your active ingredient, target, you need to know the area, the crops you're spraying. I'm trying to set up a form where I can do that way more easily instead of like handwriting it out, because I'm habitually and notoriously bad at keeping records. I do it like 6 weeks later and then just like retroactively, and that is actually not illegal, but if you were audited, is not okay. You need to do it same day. So this is a working spreadsheet, and it kind of helps me because with that form, then I can say like, here is what I sprayed, and then I can cross-reference it to this chart and say like, I use the regalia, I have it written down what the active ingredient is, the EPA number, and this also helps inform, just kind of gives me some more information. Like if you're like me, you probably Google the same information every single year. I do that because there's so much you have to know. So I kind of like having a chart that has it all here. At the top, so we're gonna go, you wanna know your name, your active ingredient, EPA number, definitely. I like to have a target because a lot of the stuff I do is broad spectrum, and this is where like some of this is a working document as I spray more and more, or like each year if I incorporate something new, or I notice something works better with one thing or another, I'll get more specific in this category, as well as with the crops. For the most part it's any, but there are some things that, like with copper, I really only spray that on solanaceous crops. I pretty much avoid cucurbits because it has a tendency to burn, especially like if you're not spraying it like literally in the cover of dark, essentially, and it doesn't dry off. But you definitely want to know shelf life of your sprays. That is affected by whether it's open or not. This is just the shelf life of an unopened one. I typically buy season to season, so I only buy enough to last that season. I never buy like huge jugs. You're gonna want to know your storage. This is so important. I had my chemicals in a non-temperature controlled shed for a really long time, and I kept bugging them to like let me store it in the docks because it's like roughly a little bit air conditioned, and it was a night and day difference, and of like efficacy. Your efficacy goes way down if it gets outside of this temperature threshold of storage. honestly, you just wasted all your money if you don't have the right storage. Don't even buy it. It won't work. You want to know the conditions to apply because for the most part, you know, it's gonna be like, you're gonna be okay with generally a dry, cloudy day for most things. But some things are like Sluggo, you kind of need the ground to be a little wet. So there are some things, conditions that you need to know. There's some things where it's like don't spray during drought or intense heat. This use of it is something I'm still working on. I don't like to spray one thing at a time. My most common mix is actually in the heat of the season or the peak of the season is neem oil, Pyganic, and BT. I sometimes mix Regalia in there, which is a fungicide. You want to know what you can mix it because it's going to just save you time and labor. So know what, a lot of things can be mixed together, so just know what that is. We are going on the assumption that when you mix it, you're using it same day. Most things you need to use same day. They have, you know, they're like within 8 hours. So I guess if you're like, yeah, I mixed it at 9 p.m. and I'm coming in at 3, I guess that's fine. But we're assuming when you mix it, you're using same day, and then whatever you have left over, you toss it out. So always make sure you're only mixing enough for what you need because not everyone has a place to dispose of those kind of chemicals or those mixes. The rate is obviously really important. We used to have curative, preventative, and reactive, and that's sort of in the frequency sometimes. But I just took it out of here because essentially, like, if preventative is going to be on your lower side, right, you're going to be more diluted, and your curative, if you're trying to address a problem, is going to be on the higher side. That is going to be affected not only just from disease or pest pressure, but sometimes it's just weather. Like if you know, like, oh, it's going to be super wet, I'm just going to up my spray, I'm going to up the dilution to maybe on the more curative side. That might affect your reasoning, not just necessarily disease presence. So it's a lot to have to consider, but you have to kind of think about it, not to use the word ecosystem, but it's really like as the whole context of the situation. Frequency, you're gonna definitely want to know. Most part, I mean, if you just stick to once a week, every 7 days, you're gonna pretty much hit it. Spinosad, there's some things that, like this is every 10 to 14 days. That stylet oil, if you're using any brambles or fruiting crop or fruit. But for the most part, if it's every 7 days, you're totally fine. I've never had an issue. This you're definitely going to want to have in a chart. It's your return entry interval and your pre-harvest interval. And that is the number of hours or conditions you have to wait until you go back in the field. This is on record. I will say this also the assumption that you're using proper PPE. So we're just baseline there. This is off the record. I don't always follow my REI. I'm just gonna say that. And that I've never had issues, but if you are someone who's concerned with that, I would say like that's a really good rule to follow. You just have to be a little more stringent and scheduled and make sure you're doing it like exactly when you're doing it. And the reason I don't is because in Texas, in the heat of the summer, I have to spray early morning. I'm not going to my site at 8 p.m. I'm just gonna be real. I'm not going there at 8 p.m. so I have to do it in the morning, and my site is so small that I'm just going to be in the field no matter what. I'm not gonna just spray and leave for the day. Like I have work to do. So just know what you're spraying. Like typically if I'm spraying like pyrethrin or Pyganic, honestly a lot of stuff I spray gets covered anyway. But if you're spraying something, maybe just say like, okay, at least wait until it's dried before you maybe interact with it. And even then, maybe you wanna use gloves, depending on how careful you're being. Definitely wash your hands, as always. But this is totally off the record. On the record, follow you, REI and PHI numbers. And then the notes are really just like, for me, how it works. I like to know how it works. Obviously, your foliar or drench can inform some of that. Some of your pesticides and fungicides are contact only. So obviously you're like, okay, for this to work, it has to contact the thing. So you're just kind of using logic of like when to spray, how to spray, where to spray. Sometimes it has to work by being eaten. Sometimes, you know, with the soil drench, you're maybe using like root shield or actinovate, and it's just a literal colonization of plant roots to help form a shield or barrier. Knowing how it works to me is important because it really does inform like how you target your spraying, what you're doing, when you're doing it. And then definitely,
it's not immediately obvious on here, but no, it's in some of my notes. Some of the stuff breaks down very quickly in the sun, much more quickly than maybe others. I use Miller New Film, to help decrease that. It's a sticker spreader, and it just holds it onto the foliage just a little bit longer. I'm a huge fan of this. I recommend it. If you're gonna spray, always mix some sort of sticker spreader adjuvant into your spray, because let's be real, the sun's gonna be out, irrigation's gonna be going, something's gonna happen, and you want it to stick as long as possible. I use Sanidate. We talked about this with, food safety. This is something a lot of farmers use to clean their harvest crates or like whatever they're delivering produce in, but we also use this as a sanitizing wash for the vegetables. It's a very, very low rate. So I have the rate here for surfaces, and then this is the rate for washing vegetables. You don't necessarily need to do that, especially if you're on city water, or I don't know that any of us are gonna get audited, and they're pretty forgiving, and they like to work with you. So for the most part, you may not need that, but I like to always point that out as well.
I will say, there have been, instances where TVA has shown up to places. They've shown up here a few times. But there is a disconnect with their agents that are out in the field and what they're actually supposed to be doing. If you're under a certain amount of, revenue, you don't have to show them anything, like at all. I can't remember what that number is, but they'll show up and try to bully you sometimes.
Is it 10,000?
I can't remember what it was. It is a low number. But there's other things involved in that as well. But you could show them, if you had all this stuff, but you're not required to. So just so you know.
It's good to know, yeah.
You're talking about USDA?
Know your rights.
TDA, Texas Department of Agriculture.
Sid Miller, Mike
Yeah.
Malkin. Just quickly, I don't know that I can actually share this since it's on my company Dropbox. But if it were my first year, I do really like Root Shield. If you have dampening off problems in your greenhouse, it's a great one. Actinovate and Regalia are going to be really great preventatives. And then Oxidate is a really great broad spectrum, as well as either Cease or anything with potassium bicarbonate is a really great broad spectrum for some of those like powdery mildew, especially some of the most common things that knock out our cucurbits. So I would always get like some sort of potassium bicarbonate my first year, and if you have a little extra, cash, maybe some Regalia or Actinovate. Oxidate is really great. It's basically just hydrogen peroxide, essentially. It's like Sanidate. If I was going to get pesticides my first year, I would get Azagard or anything with azadirachtin. Your neem oil should cost money. It should not be cheap. And that's because to have azadirachtin, that is the actual growth regulating hormone, so that, how it works is it disrupts the growth stages from like larva to pupil. I'm not gonna get this right. Pupil to larva, larva to pupil to adult. It disrupts those stages, nymphs. So for you to use neem oil, you have to use it continuously. That's the thing with spraying. A lot of organic sprays, they're not just a wipeout. There is, and pyrethrin is, there's some that are, but a lot of them are like, you have to use it continuously, so you have to have a spraying regimen if you are gonna go organic. Because a lot of this stuff isn't like super highly knockdown effective. It requires repetition. So if you're gonna do it, definitely get neem oil, in my opinion. Anything with azadirachtin, and it can be mixed with BT, it can be mixed with any pyrethrin. It's really versatile, it's safe. Microtrol and MP, yeah, you can incorporate those as like in your rotation. So you do neem oil 1 week, Microtrol or MP the next week. Not necessarily a must. Sluggo is really the only thing I've found to really deal with slugs and snails, to be honest. So I am a big fan of it because I have a ton of slugs and actually I have a ton of snails. But I have not had I know a lot of people use diatomaceous earth. I have never had success with diatomaceous earth.
I've also never really had success with Surround, and that's because you have to continuously apply it for it to really be any sort of effective. And at that point, it is kind of, in my opinion, on the same rate as like beneficials. It's never fully 100% effective. When I'm thinking of like things I'm applying or buying, expensive things I'm buying, I need it to work for me to get this thing to market. And the thing that's gonna sell at market is gonna be honestly like a good looking head of whatever, or something that is not bug eaten. I do like insecticidal soap. It is broad spectrum. I would say that maybe next, but neem oil, definitely. You spinosad if you want, but it's like this in trust for like a small bottle. I think it's a pint. It's like $600, and it does affect very specifically things that are an issue sometimes that nothing else will impact. But I found like I can get away with Pyganic or Evergreen is the cheaper alternative to that pretty easily. BT now is just the liquid form of Dipel BT. It's more expensive, so if you're again trying to save money, go with Dipel. But BT now is nice because you don't have to make sure the granulars are all dissolved. I don't use any herbicides, but Suppress I think is not the only organic one, but it is an organic one. We are talking about U-film. Okay, wrapping up. Amendments. I use a variety. So I have compost, which I feel very privileged to have. It is available to me. I would say like if you have access to good compost, put your investment there, truly. The sulfur, I have very high, I have an 8.1 pH level in my soil. I can deal with that with compost, but I do throw in elemental sulfur with my fertilizer. So I have a fertilizer mix. Based on my soil tests, I use Sigma, which is poultry based, but I also use Ferticell. And they have two great products that I use for fruiting crops specifically. Active 5-10-10, they're both organic, and ProCal 300, 20%. They're really, if you're like, you've used fertilizer and you're like, I can't tell the difference, you will tell if you use those. But again, this is for fruiting crops. This is for after your initial flower set. You wanna start, it doesn't have to be like a scheduled thing, but just know like in your head, like I know in my head I'm spraying every week, and I know I'm applying fertilizer my fertilizer mix every time I plant, and then during my growing season, flowering season, I am applying Active 5-10-10 usually every 3 to 4 weeks as a side dress. ProCal, you can spray, it's a foliar, you just don't want to mix it with anything with high phosphorus. That's just a little tidbit. And then Biomin is your nitrogen, soy-based nitrogen source if you want it. I'm actually not using that this year, but it is an option.
You said,
and then Solubor. I always throw boron in. Even if you don't have necessarily a boron deficiency, just toss it in your fertilizer mix. It literally doesn't hurt, and then you won't have boron deficiency. You'd be surprised how little you need of this and how impactful boron deficiencies are. So always throw it in is what I say. Unless your soil test comes back and they're like it's poisonous how much boron you have. I doubt that's gonna happen. And it's fairly inexpensive as well.
You said the Active 5-10 for after flowering?
Yeah, I do it after the initial flower sets. Actually, after the initial fruit set is what I would say. And it keeps a continuous supply of flowers essentially, and a continuous supply of fruit. So, for me, I get like a flush, right? This just continues, not necessarily that first flush, but it just provides consistency of basically the tomato or eggplant. Peppers is what I use it for usually. I would use it for cucurbits if I can get them to not die from vine borers and cucumber beetles as quickly.
What's the difference in price from the organic and
Like how much you could sell for it?
No, meaning like, buying it, just would be like,
Like glyphosate versus.
yeah, glyphosate
whatever.
versus organic, that's a good question.
I don't know actually. I've never sprayed anything conventional, to be honest, or not Honor certified. So I don't know. I've never sprayed glyphosate. I wouldn't. I could confidently say that. Again, assumptions are PPE is a must. That's your protection against getting burned. Sometimes masks from inhaling if you are afraid of that. My dad is a huge breathe the neem oil in, and I'm like, I don't know. Anyway, pH of your water, if you're mixing a solution, must be neutral or close to neutral. For the most part, that's not going to generally be an issue, but if you're sourcing your water from like a well or whatever, groundwater, just make sure your pH is correct. Ideally city water, if you're doing city water, which I would recommend, you should not have an issue with that. But even all those organic products, some of them react differently to the pH of your water. Oh my god, it's sad. Definitely don't leave mixes overnight. Storage, where you store it must be dry, contained, and not at risk to cross-contamination. So I do not store fertilizer with gasoline, for instance. They're in different sheds. Definitely get the cabinets for your gasoline if you must. Make sure there is that cross-contamination of chemicals across the board is just non-existent. So set up your storage appropriately, and again, if you do not have the storage temperature range, just don't even buy it. I can tell you this so strongly based on experience. It is a waste of money. It will degrade and be ineffective. So get your storage correct. Get those few things that are a little bit more broad spectrum, and I have seen a huge difference for myself. So I would say it will be a huge difference if you follow a regimen, if you're consistent with it. Again, if you're doing organic, you have to be consistent. There's very few things that are knocked down, go away. It's not gonna work like that. This is real quick. The only thing we've already kind of talked about Arbico, Seven Springs, Drip Depot. I use Berry Hill as well. Site 1, we already talked about locally. It is honestly one of the cheapest sources for PVC. Hunter Nodes, Netafim, seed companies. These are all in here. The one thing I do like to point out is Knolls. And then we can take some questions and maybe go on a little walk. Because it's warm. It's been 4 hours. We're there. So Knolls is a two-part. They are Amish.
Whoa.
Maybe Amish adjacent. I don't know enough about the Mennonite, maybe? I don't know. They are originally on the East Coast, so you can see here. This is all sourced out of Pennsylvania, and the Midwest sources for everywhere else. Midwest and West. You will not find cheaper irrigation, drip tape, row cover, trellising, wire hoops, everything. They have greenhouse parts, they sell whole greenhouses. And one thing you probably won't be able to get from them is seed. I think it delineates that. But it is, the one thing, the prohibitive thing is the shipping cost. So we used to set up depots with them where multiple farms would come together because they ship by motor freight quite frequently. And one farm would just be the Knolls depot, and it would charge everything. And then each farm could just pay off whatever their order was. But even for me, I still buy from them, and I am just one farmer. I just buy all my row cover, all my irrigation, all their Jang seeder is going to be cheaper if you're looking for a Jang. I buy everything all in one go, and so that my shipping cost is so much lower. Just buying 2 rolls of 0.5 ounce row cover covers the shipping versus buying it from somewhere else. That's just 2 rows of row cover. Of course, if you get a bunch of stuff that weighs a ton of, your shipping costs go up with weight. But typically I'm buying a lot of stuff, and again, it's all here. It is the best kept secret in my opinion in farming. Nobody I know in North Texas sources from them. It's crazy to me because it's
so cheap.
You're not gonna gatekeep that? I'm just kidding.
As 0%. Oh my god. Again, we are not doing well enough for gatekeeping to be like, come on. We gotta tell each other. Of course, it is gonna be conventional stuff, so like you're not gonna find biodegradable twine, but you're literally not gonna find it cheaper. I'm telling you. Port Nova, they've got post pounders. I buy oak stakes from them. This is what I use to do year-round growing without tunnels. 2.5 ounce thermal blanket frost protection. You're truly not gonna find, like, you're not gonna find this cheaper, and it lasts across multiple seasons. It is amazing. But row cover, they have Protect Net, which is insect netting that you can use. I can't say cheap enough times, I'm so sorry. But it's so cost effective. I mean, come on guys. Come on. Come on. I know I'm just, maybe y'all don't know prices, but you just have to take one type, like just come in here, type in 0.55 ounce, 7 by 1,000 foot, and you'll immediately see the difference. So, I'm a big fan of them. I have used their biodegradable mulch. I exclusively source my drip tape from them. All of their drip irrigation parts are at the very bottom. You do have to do a little bit of searching. It's a big catalog. 10 out of 10. Don't source anywhere else. It'll save you so much money.
10/10.
10 out of 10.
How do you know it's an Amish company?
Or Amish, well, you just have to call them. And if you listen,
Do they speak in German?
I'm not saying that like I'm not like, oh, I just assume based on how they sound. I knew this information, but if you call them, you can hear it in the cadence. They're very helpful. Again, I don't know if it's Amish.
How long has
It
the
is
company been around?
adjacent to that.
How long has the company been around?
I don't know. A lot of people in the Northeast use them because that's where they started. I don't know actually. I don't know the history. They're very helpful, but they're very like to the point.
They are Amish?
They're not
They
there
don't
to
waste
chat.
time?
They're not chatting.
They don't
with you.
waste time?
No chatting. But I'll ask them the next time I talk to them.
Do you try
You'll
to
be
chat
like,
with
ma'am, what
them?
do you need?
It's 100% like that.
You try to chat with them?
1000%. Yeah.
And they say
I can
you're
literally.
chatting?
Do you want me to call them, put them on speakerphone? We can do this together. Yeah. Okay. Any questions about anything? I know the first part of this workshop was 2 weeks ago, so maybe leave a question for that. I don't think any of y'all will ask me this, but I don't do consulting. Hyatt would be a great person to interact with about that. But I do tell people, this is my intro slide. So many, yeah, all the memories. That is my email, my work email. Again, if you're patient, flexible, it might take me a couple days to get back to you, but I truly believe in the power of the collective. Like, we're not gonna get there on our own as individual farmers, and we're just not. So let's stay in touch, let's talk, let's see each other in the future at other things, other workshops, not mine, other people's workshops. Yeah, and that's an Elsa Craig onion, and that's why I can eat it like that. I can't eat other onions like that. People are like, oh, you're weird. Like, it's just because it's an Elsa Craig. Yeah.
Are you on Instagram or something?